everybody to the Zoning Board of Appeals public hearing, September 12th, 2023. Can I have a motion I will motion to open the public hearing. Can I have a second? And all in favor?
Aye.
We have tonight in person, board members Luke Farron, Thomas Kempner, and Joyce Giffra. Via Zoom, we have, excuse me, Julia McCormick. And also via Zoom, we have our legal counsel, Jeffrey Blinkoff. Jeffrey, can we see you? Who will be with us until about 7:30. In person, we have our village planner, Alex Wallach, our environmental consultant, Chick Voorhees, and standing in for Jeffrey Blinkoff after he must leave for a prior engagement at 7:30 will be John Borquin, and thank you very much for doing that. So we're going to start off with a written decision in the case of 74 White Street, case number 3163. I'm going to motion to accept the decision as written. The decision involves no exterior changes to the residence itself and no changes to the property itself. It's a change of use application. Has everybody had a chance to? So I'll motion to accept the decision as written in case number 3163, 74 White Street. Can I have a second?
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Julia's an aye. For housekeeping, we should do the adjournments first, I think. And the first adjournment is case number 3144, Stephen Hickey, 1377 Meadow Lane. I will make a motion to accept the applicant's request for adjournment to October 26th, 2023, as they continue to make efforts to cure a violation on the property. Can I have a second?
Second.
And all in favor of accepting the applicant's request for an adjournment to October 26th, 2023 in the case of Stephen Hickey, number 3144.
Aye.
Please indicate aye.
Aye.
And so that's unanimous.
You have Jeffrey there. You see Jeffrey on?
Hello.
Yes. Hi, Jeffrey.
Hello.
We have another adjournment, which is case number 3161, 20 Hillcrest Lane. The applicant is not yet ready to proceed, so we will accept, or I will make an adjournment request in case number 3160 for Gary Flanagan, 20 Hillcrest Lane. Can I have a second to approve the adjournment?
Second.
To what date?
Let's make it, we'll adjourn to October 26th. So a motion to adjourn case number 3160 to October 26th, 2023. Can I have a second?
Second.
And all in favor of accepting the adjournment in
Aye.
case number 3160?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, aye. Julia, do we have your vote?
Yes, aye.
I have a motion to adjourn case number 3165, 107 Woolley Street to October 26th, 2023 as well. Can I have a second to adjourn case number 3165, Victoria Khan, 107 Woolley Street to October 26th, 2023?
Second.
And all in favor of accepting that adjournment?
Aye.
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 Okay, so that's unanimous. And then we can move right along to case number 3156, Eiffel Residence LLC, 2020 Meadow Lane. Jeffrey, do you want to just weigh in on some questions we had on this, and then we can see if we can proceed?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, if I may, there was also one, if you will, sort of bookkeeping matter. The open
resolution.
meetings law was previously amended, and the village board of trustees, I believe, previously approved a local law, which, as long as there is a quorum of members of the board physically present in the boardroom, that a member who is not physically present but for health reasons cannot be present would also be permitted to participate in the meeting. And what I would suggest is that the board, so that its written procedures would comply and be commensurate with that, if the board is in agreement, approve a resolution that would allow for the participation of a member who for health reasons can't be present. I've prepared a draft resolution. Entertained?
Yes, so this pertains to case number 3164, Robert Kornstein and Sherry Gottesman.
It could, but it may also pertain to any other case in which a board member who's not physically present, while there is a quorum present, would nonetheless be permitted to participate. So if I could just read this into the record?
Yes, go ahead.
Sure. Whereas the Zoning Board of Appeals wishes to allow for the participation of all board members in all matters to the greatest extent possible, and whereas the board is aware of the circumstance under which Public Officers Law 103A will allow for participation by board members by video conference in accord with written procedures, and whereas the board is aware that it may use video conferencing to conduct its meetings as long as a minimum number of members are physically present to fulfill the board's quorum requirement, and whereas the board is also aware that the board can adopt a policy which provides that members of the board are to be physically present at the meeting unless unable to be physically present due to extraordinary circumstances, including disability, illness, caregiving responsibilities, or any other significant or unexpected factor or event which precludes the member's physical attendance. Now therefore be it resolved that as long as a quorum of the board is physically present for a meeting, any other member who cannot be physically present due to extraordinary circumstances, including what I had identified before, shall be permitted to fully participate in the meeting via video conference. So is there a motion to approve that resolution?
So moved.
I'll second. And then all in favor of approving the resolution?
All right.
Say aye. And Julia?
Aye.
And-
Jeff, you'll provide that for the minutes?
Yes, I certainly will.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to have interrupted. You had asked a question. Can I just respond to the question you asked now?
Of course, go ahead.
Sure. So the question had been what was the background with respect to the application that's currently being considered before the board, and that was the Eiffel Tower, the Eiffel residence. And the background is this. Previously, there was a denial issued through the building department, which had included a statement that there was a need for a wetlands permit with respect to certain gates located on the property, which I believe are within 150 feet of a wetland. Thereafter, the building inspector issued a modified denial letter. Effectively, what he did was to cross out from the original denial letter the requirement that the gates and the screening would have required a wetlands permit. And the basis for his doing so, I believe, was a determination made by the building department that it was not a regulated activity. I've corresponded with the building inspector, and after having reviewed the code, I just wanted to be sure that all of the pertinent aspects within the code have been considered by him relevant to that issue. That matter comes back before the board tonight, as you just called it on the calendar. I understand that Mr. Hosso may not be available tonight, and quite frankly, the request for him to have been available was only very recently made, so I expect that he is not. But I would think that matter should be clarified for the board for the purposes of the record in conjunction with this application. Having said that, as you know, and as you'll see in the agenda, there are a number of things being requested by the applicant, but that was one of them, and that was the change that was made. So I think
Jeffrey,
that provides the
let
background.
me ask this question. If I understand it correctly, your opinion is that the installation and construction of driveway gates does require a wetlands permit. Is that your reading of the zoning code?
I do read it that way, Mr. Chairman. There's two applicable provisions within the code, one of which would provide and speak about the definition of a regulated activity. And the section that I will be speaking with the building inspector about is section 116-19.2, which pertains to general regulations and which indicates in part that a structure placed within 150 feet of the boundary of any wetland would require a wetlands permit. And in the code, something that I think bears following up, and I would intend to do so.
And Alex, do you have some light that you can shed on this? Because we're reading the zoning code, and it seems like the first denial letter stated that driveway gates required a wetlands permit. Something must have transpired to encourage the building inspector to, I guess, change his opinion and to weigh in that driveway gates do not require a wetlands permit. Our legal counsel is reading the zoning code and opining that driveway gates do require a wetlands permit. What happened?
Sure, I can try and shed some light on this. So when this application was originally made, the applicant provided a very detailed description of all of the different elements in the application with the respective setbacks. And you could see the way that it was reflected on the agenda and on the legal notice. There's a lot of different elements set back at different purposes. A lot of these accurately describe the project, and all those elements need a building permit. So that's the way it was presented to the building department. And that originally included the gate and the gate posts. When it came to our attention that this site had a driveway gate that didn't have a permit, they attempted to cure that violation by securing the building permit. They subsequently went to the Architecture Review Board. They got design approval for that, and the building department was able to issue a building permit, and that they now have a CO for that gate to cure any potential violation there. And in that process, it came to my attention that a fence and a driveway gate through that process wasn't required to get a wetlands permit. And so I asked the building inspector to verify the way that we had advertised this, and he brought to my attention that including the gate and fence as part of the description for the purposes of the zoning board was an oversight, that it's something that needs a building permit, but it is in his determination and interpretation of the code, that it does not require a wetlands permit. And I understand this is consistent with past practice of prior building inspectors. I don't believe that fences or gates have been historically referred to this board for wetlands permits. I understand Mr. Blinkoff disagrees based on his reading of the code, but I've discussed this many times with the building inspector, and I understand that this is his interpretation, which he feels is consistent with the way that the code is being administered and has been administered in the past, where fences are regulated differently than structures, which have different setback requirements and are treated differently under the zoning ordinance. So for that reason, we took another look at the description on the agenda, removed those requests, and another application that had a similar request that was also included that probably should have been omitted. And I believe the building inspector provided a letter clarifying his interpretation today, which I believe you all should have.
So, and correct me if I'm understanding this the way you're expressing it. Perhaps the denial letter and the initial advertising of this application was based upon the applicant thinking that they needed a wetlands permit, and the building department was just going along with what the applicant was suggesting. So the applicant was under the impression that it needed a wetlands permit because it was 58 feet from wetlands instead of more than 150 feet.
Well, that's the way it was.
And that's why it was written up, because we were following what the applicant
Well, it was provided that way in the description of the project,
Right.
that the applicant provided, which is, and the setbacks there are correct. What should have happened is that it should have been removed when it was advertised for the wetlands permit, because it requires a building permit of the department, but not necessarily a wetlands permit based on the determination of the building inspector. So there was a little bit of a nuance there, because not all of the activity described rose to the level of regulated activity within a regulated area based on a close reading of the code.
But what about your reading of 116-19-2, which doesn't talk about regulated activities, it simply talks about structures? Aren't driveway gates structures?
I leave that to the building inspector. I know reasonable people can disagree. That's why we have one building inspector who makes that determination.
Okay, yeah.
I think the definition of structure can be a little bit complicated. I know they have to draw the line somewhere, otherwise, a mailbox could be a structure, or light post. So generally, fences, is my understanding, based on discussions, have not been treated as structures for the
Okay.
purpose of this.
But these aren't fences. These are electronic gates with stone pillars and underground wiring. Is it your understanding that the building inspector is saying that is not a structure?
That's my understanding.
Okay, that's what we're waiting for him to clarify. I mean, we're happy to process it. I don't understand how electronic driveway gates with stone posts,
And anchored in concrete.
are not structures.
If-
And if they're built within 150 feet of wetlands, I have our legal counsel reading the code and saying clearly it requires a wetlands permit. So we're just asking for the building inspector actually to respond to legal counsel and to state on the record what exactly happened. We just want transparency in how did this happen?
Sure.
Okay, was it just that we're blindly following what the applicant requests and not confirming that their requests for relief are unnecessary? We're not doing that at the onset, and we're catching it later? Or, as you put it, it came to your attention. We're trying to figure out on the record, how did it come to your attention that these driveway gates didn't require a wetlands permit?
Right. Well, I hope that I explained that clearly on the record, and I know you have the response from counsel by the building inspector, which is also part of the record, which hopefully explains that as well. I know with regard to structures, the way that it's regulated under the zoning ordinance, if they were structures, they wouldn't be allowed in a front yard because of the way structures are regulated. So probably it's a case where the code language could be clarified, but as I understand it, that's the determination that has historically been used in the village by the building department.
Okay, maybe that's just what we need from the building inspector, a statement from him that driveway gates,
Is that not what you have in
not at all,
writing?
not at all. Everything we've received has been vague. Emails to the building department remained unanswered when we were asking this. We were asking this for months. What's going on? We were asking, why are you in front of the ARB? No response. We didn't understand why you went to the ARB for design approval when our reading was that you needed a wetlands permit. But that process through the ARB, and as we saw that, we didn't know what was going on. Nobody was responding to any board member inquiring. And then the responses that we have received, we find still very vague. So we don't want to hold the applicant up because it seems like something that will ultimately be clarified, but we're going to have it clarified in writing for the record. So yes, Jeffrey wrote still another letter to the building inspector requiring clarification. If it's what you're saying, that the building inspector truly believes that stone pillars with driveway gates that open and close and electronically operated with electricity underground and all of that installation is not a structure, I'd like to see him write that to the board, and just so we have clarity on what happened here, especially since initially he told us that it did require a wetlands permit and then changed his mind. But it doesn't hold up the applicant. Let's process the application as long as the other board members are fine with it. We just wanted a lot more transparency as to what was happening, and we weren't getting it, and we still don't have it.
Well, I think the building inspector feels that it's been clear, but I'll ask him to further clarify that letter if you think that that's not the case.
We'll get there. Alex, who writes the turn down letters?
So the denial letters are typically drafted in the building department, either by myself or one of the building inspectors, and ultimately signed off by typically one of the building inspectors and the chief building inspector, Tim.
Got it.
And typically we get a initial draft of that provided by the applicant to make sure that we understand that they know which variances that they're asking for in their application. That's often amended and corrected by the building department as necessary.
So if Tien has the most institutional knowledge of how things, he's been here forever, when the draft went to him, do you know why he would have signed off on it, knowing that, in his view, it's not practice to have gates, driveway gates?
I think in that aspect, like I said, it was probably an oversight. You know, there's a lot of different elements here. I think the idea was that they're trying to be as transparent as possible and describe the application as fully as possible. But as I pointed out, including that language for the purposes of the zoning board indicates that it needs a special permit. If that's not the case,
Right.
it needs to be removed from that project description, even though it's reflected on the building permit application. So there's a little bit of a distinction there that
I'm with
might have
you.
been missed.
I'm with you, and oversights happen, but it's not just this application, right? We have one or two other applications where, you have to understand that's where we're wondering, how did the chief building inspector, who has the institutional knowledge, let 3 applications go through without catching that? That's what we're looking for, I think.
Yeah, and that's what I've sought to clarify with the building inspector and having this conversation with them, and that it's one thing to include it there for transparency's sake,
Sure.
but making sure that everyone understands what it means to include it on the denial letter and what that in terms of needing a permit. So I understand he wanted to make that publicly available, and it's accurate and describes the project that needs a building permit, but shouldn't have been included on a letter that reflects a special permit if it doesn't need a special permit.
Well, better to make it public than to make it appear as if it was hidden. So I appreciate him, crossing it out and circulating it, and we'll reach an understanding, I'm sure.
It's a nuanced area of code, I'm sure you
Sure.
understand.
Do the board members feel comfortable proceeding with processing the application, or Julia, do you have any comments or questions?
I had hoped that Tian would have made an appearance, and I recognize that it was a very late request, but I had hoped that we would have had that opportunity before we processed the rest of the application.
I'd feel comfortable coming back to it, and I would say Mr. Paskett should proceed.
How do you feel?
I don't know enough.
Hmm?
I don't know enough to have a good answer, sorry.
Are you happy, or can we process the application is the question, or do you want more information with respect to the prerequisite issue of whether or not whether a wetlands permit is truly required? Or can we could defer to the building department and follow up later, because it is a little curious, but.
I think we need some transparency in how this transpired. But given that, I think Mr. Pasca could go ahead and make his presentation, but with the caveat, we're going to leave this open until we get this, information from the building department.
Are you okay with that, Julia?
You guys are talking
Yeah.
about our application. Do
Sure.
we get an opportunity to say something about it?
Of course you do.
I
You're
mean,
gonna have more than
Please.
a fair opportunity. You're gonna have plenty of time to talk about your application. I just wanna make sure as a prerequisite issue, all the board members,
But I'd like to address
You know-
that issue too.
because, go ahead.
You're voting on
Go ahead.
something that could affect whether we're
Go
going
ahead.
forward
If you're
tonight.
speaking to
Just to
how-
this,
Yes,
just to
go
this
ahead.
issue. Anthony Pasca, Essex Hefter Angel Battalion Pasca, and the counsel for the applicant. And at first, I normally get a little offended when I don't get invited to speak, but Alex kind of summed up the process as well as I could have done it, probably better. The only question I have is whether the board was aware of the letter that was issued today. Is that in the record?
Yes.
So last time we were here, I'll just point this out, we were told that we couldn't go forward because this is almost a quote, our hands are tied because of what the building inspector says. And so we, as Alex said, we were transparent. We laid everything out that we thought we might need as far as the application goes. We put the gates, the proposed gates on there, and we're talking about them. We're going through the same issues that affect the driveway, which we will talk about tonight, affect the proposed new location of the gates as well. And so we're happy to talk about them, and whether you guys want to get a little more clarity on the issue between now and your decision, that's fine. But it really doesn't affect,
No, no, we
it's
wanna
academic
process
as
it.
far as we're concerned, because we're happy to talk about everything, address all the wetland criteria, that's what we're here for. So it doesn't really make much sense for us to not go forward just because you want to understand whether or not the original application was correct or the modified application. That's not our choice. And
No, no, let me give you the context in a second. But the first question I would have for you is, based upon your application, you thought the driveway gates required a wetlands permit. Why?
I don't know. I didn't give any thought to it. We laid out all the dimensions. That's what we normally do. That's what most applicants normally do, is lay out all the dimensions to the building department, and they base their notice based on that. And so
No, what they're saying
but
is that your application requested this wetlands permit.
our application
they followed
certainly
along.
called it all out. Every setback dimension that was on the survey, including the gates, was called out. And, I wasn't shocked when it was noticed this way. There was nothing surprising, and we went forward based on that being the original denial. So I'm not, it's a fight I don't really want to take, because we're not dying on that sword. We're not gonna, it doesn't matter to us, to be honest,
Well,
whatever the
let me
policy is.
Let me put it in context.
But-
The reason
but-
why this arose as an issue was because the driveway gates are in place. So just for the record, and, for why we've been concerned about it, okay, there is a law currently on the books that we are not supposed to process applications if there is a violation.
An
When we
actual
looked at this
violation.
application, okay, we saw that there were driveway gates that had been constructed without a building permit. That's why this issue became magnified, okay?
I understand.
The driveway gates were there without a building permit. Then when we looked, we said, wait a second, they're also in the wetlands, so don't they require a wetlands permit? Somehow, okay, the applicant and the building inspector and the village planner decided that no wetlands permit was required, and instead, all that was required was to go to the architectural review board and have the design of the gates approved. During this period, when all of this was happening over, 6 weeks? Nobody ever advised this zoning board as to what was happening and why. And that's what bothers the board. The lack of transparency
No,
about what
but
was happening for those 6 weeks,
That's-
despite our questions.
that's-
So we can process the application, don't worry about that, you're not being stymied.
No, but hold on,
But that's why it became
if
an
there's
issue.
an accusation out there, we were here 3 months ago, and we were told to go away.
Yes, because there was a violation
Yeah,
on the
but,
property.
so this is our first opportunity coming back to this board. We worked with the building department, which is what we're directed to do. It's the building department, the building inspector, that decides whether there's a violation or not. And so we did everything we had to satisfy him, and he said, go to the ARB. Went to the ARB to legalize the existing gates. There's another application for the proposed gates. They're being dealt with separately. So we did everything that we're supposed to do by working with the building department. I can't speak for you as to why you're offended by not being part of that process, but it's really
Because
not,
it's
you're
because
not
it's
part
an
of that
ongoing
process.
application
Yeah,
in
but you're
front of
not,
us.
you paused the application so that we could deal with this violation issue that was sprung on us the day of the last meeting, which we did. And at that time, the gates hadn't even been mentioned. It was just the tennis court, which we shaved off the tennis court. Then we went back and we were told, okay, there's also this question about the gates that's now arisen. All of that was being done between us and the building department, because that's what we're directed to do. It's not a zone, you guys aren't an enforcement board.
We don't want
You're-
to be an enforcement board.
You
Okay,
said
but
that
have you-
many times.
Have you read the new legislation? We are required
I know
to
when there's a violation.
to not process an
When
application
there's
if
a
there's a
violation.
violation.
Correct.
So we were told initially there was a violation. That's why we
I
stopped
agree.
processing the
I
application.
understand that. I
Then
understand that.
things happened without anybody telling us how the violation was going to be cured, and
No,
you're back.
There was only one violation issued, and that was on, with respect to the tennis court, which was taken care of. The whole gate thing happened after you guys put a pause on things. And we had a conversation about that. I don't agree with that law. I don't think it's legal, but so be it. You put the pause on the application to deal with the tennis court. We started dealing with the tennis court, and then we were told, by the way, while you're at it, before you go back to the zoning board, deal with the gates. Go get an ARB. We were told to do that, and we did. And now we're back. There's no violation, right? We all agree. There is no violation issued by the building inspector, which is the prerequisite for that law that you raised. It says a violation issued by the building inspector, not by anybody else. So,
We're with you,
when you
Tony.
said the
We
last
want to
time-
process the
okay,
application.
when you said the last time, our hands are tied because the building inspector said this. Well, now, the building inspector says there's no violation relating to these gates. So, we just want to go forward. And by the
We're
way, we're
ready.
going to address all the
We're ready
wetlands
to go
issues.
forward.
Great.
Julie, are you okay with going forward? Can Julia hear me?
Yes, let's go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, before everything got paused, we had one meeting with the board where we went through all the building changes and all the wetlands issues. And really where we left off was that you guys asked us to take a deeper look at the front yard, particularly with respect to drainage for the tennis court and with respect to the wraparound driveway. Some wetlands questions came up at that meeting, and so the basic charge that we went back with was to rework and take a deeper look at the front yard, look at the landscaping, and so I want to ask Mike Shano to talk about how the plans changed since the first iteration that you guys saw when we had our first meeting. Okay, Mike?
Hi, Mike Golshiano from InterScience Research Associates on behalf of the applicant. If we can just allow Sabrina Kelly. Sabrina, what's the name?
Under inner science and memories.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So, at the April 27th, 2023 hearing, where this application is to request variances from the Dollar Dune Crest and also to request wetland special permit to renovate and expand an existing single-family dwelling, where those additions and the work that's being proposed is within 150 feet of the wetlands. Specifically, the applicant proposes additions and renovations to the existing dwelling to construct a new swimming pool, an at-grade masonry patio, a second-story deck, to install a pervious driveway, and to upgrade our existing septic system to an IA-OWTS. At the April 27th meeting, the board requested a few modifications and had some additional requests. Those included that we consider adding drainage for the tennis court, that we consider proposing a wetlands buffer and provide a revegetation plan for that buffer, that we verify the wetlands lines. We had originally had a survey that showed 3 different wetlands lines with 3 different dates, which was based on a collection of FOIL requests, and that we kind of like put them all together. So they wanted us to verify and speak with Chick to see that they were all still accurate. You also asked us to provide a swimming pool cross-section to demonstrate that we had proper groundwater separation. We needed to confirm the residential parking calculations, and also you asked us to seriously consider removing the wraparound driveway. Regarding the wetlands line verification, we
we're able to go out there and visually inspect the wetlands to the west and the wetlands to the north. And James Walker from our office, who has over 30 plus years of experience, actually probably closer to 40 at this point. Yep. He went out there and visually inspected it and verified that those are still accurate. And we also had a conversation with Mr. Voorhees by email on May 13th regarding those wetlands, and Chick confirmed that we can continue to use that wetlands line, especially because this board in another configuration approved a substantial wetlands permit on that property. And so that line would still be accurate enough for us to use. So the wetlands lines that are shown on the survey are good for us to proceed with. Regarding the pool cross-section, we added that to the survey that was submitted, and we are able to show that we have 4.5 feet to groundwater. So we're definitely more than the 2 feet that would be normally required. So that's great. And then as part of the submission that we made prior to the June meeting, CMAC prepared some plans that showed the parking diagrams to identify that we conform and comply with the required parking for the house and the number of bedrooms that are proposed. And as you can see on this survey, the driveway was reconfigured in order to remove the wraparound driveway, which we were proposing to add an additional side on the east side of the tennis court. So we've removed that, and in order to provide proper turning radius and whatnot, we reconfigured the driveway. CMX is going to get up later just to talk about his conversation that he had with Dean McNamara, the fire marshal, to make sure that this all complies with what would be required. So we'll get into that later. Also, you can see that we've added sufficient drainage in shallow structures in order to provide drainage for the tennis court. With that, we can move on to just talking about the buffer plans and the revegetation plan that we've prepared here. So first, in order to prepare this, James Walker again went out and he inspected what the existing vegetation was. And the purpose of this was to identify whether there was any, based on our conversations with Mr. Voorhees, was to identify whether any of the vegetation that is there currently is invasive. While some of it is landscaping, like hedges, privet hedges and the like, there's some of the vegetation, particularly I believe autumn olive, Moro's honeysuckle, and Japanese black pines that would be considered an invasive species. So you can see those in red, outlined in red on the plan. So we've identified those. The existing vegetation that would be non-native, that is not invasive, Chick indicated that we could keep as long as we also kind of bolster around it where necessary. That doesn't include lawn, obviously, but things like certain types of shrubs and grasses and that are not lawn, we could keep. And so that's kind of the basis for this initial existing conditions plan. And then in order to identify the size of the buffer that we would use, we first drew the 50-foot wide buffer from the wetlands from all three directions, which you can see on this plan. The wetlands to the north, obviously because it's a 50-foot wide right-of-way, it falls just short of the property line. So there's no buffer that would be required from, based on the 50-foot wide recommended buffer that the board has used in the past, there would be no buffer required from that. But you can see with the black lines on this plan where that 50-foot would fall from the wetlands from the east and also from the west. So the area that is on the property itself that is buffer would consist of approximately 6,590 feet. So we took that as a guide, and because of where the existing driveway is, you can see on the west side there, we couldn't push it all the way to the 50 foot. So we wanted to still provide an equivalent area. So it's a variable width buffer is what we wound up coming up with. And so the proposed buffer as shown on the plans that have been submitted is 6,595 feet, so 5 square feet larger than what would be a normal 50-foot wide buffer. And just to put that into perspective, the western buffer, as shown on this plan, would have an average width of about 46 feet. The eastern buffer would have an average width of about 63 feet. So when you average both sides together, the average variable width is approximately 54.5 feet. So we actually are slightly larger than if you look at the variable width on average, we actually would exceed the 50-foot wide buffer here. And so in addition to showing those buffers, we're also showing that in the areas that we are going to take out invasive vegetation, we're going to replace that with native species. And that includes not only areas within the buffer, but also you can see such as number 4 on this plan, where we are replacing black pines with eastern red cedar. So we tried to, within the wetlands area, we're trying to remove any invasive vegetation where we can. So this is what we've come up with here, and we hope that satisfies that aspect of the wetlands requirements. Please note that we had provided this board with a copy of the DEC wetlands non-jurisdiction letter, so they wound up not taking jurisdiction from the wetlands to the north. They actually, the wetlands to the west is just not a regulated area for them, so this was submitted just so the board is aware that the DEC is not taking jurisdiction over that. Based on the submission that we have made, we've addressed all of the items that the board has brought up to date. In addition, since we're proposing a wetlands buffer, and also to remind the board that we are part of this application includes the upgrade of the septic system to an IOWTS, we believe that a wetlands permit should be issued for this permit, for this project. So, thank you. CMAC can describe some of the conversations that he's had with the fire marshal about the driveway.
Before we
want
go to the,
Chick-
huh?
Go ahead.
Before we go to the fire marshal, can we just do a before and after? What's there right now? What are you accomplishing?
Oh, sure.
I just want to get back to a couple of basics before
Yep.
we really.
So do you want to talk about the planting plan?
No, I'm sorry. I meant on a more macro, just what house, pool, and tennis is there now?
Mhm.
Let's just go back to
Sure.
a more macro picture of what are we accomplishing, what's the benefit to the applicant,
Mhm.
and then we can balance the detriment. I understand the buffer is wonderful,
Great.
it's great, but
Great.
but we're in details that I think we need to pull back a little bit and remind ourselves of what the macro picture is.
Okay. Yeah, Sabrina's just looking for the,
Condition survey.
correct.
I guess we can all address that, but which we did spend a good amount of time, but it was 4 months ago, I think.
Yeah, we can do it quick.
So
I just
it's
want to,
fine. The driving force behind the project is the renovations to the house. And if you recall, what we tried to do was get some more space, but in a compact way by using as much of the existing footprint as we could. We stuck to the, we focused heavily on the coverage area that was within the Dolliver setback by trying to make sure that anything that we we did a net positive on all the coverage that was within the setback area, so that at least by the time we came to you with a proposal, you'd see that it was a thoughtful project where we tried to make the most out of the existing space that we had in order to pick up some additional area. That's the benefit to the applicant, obviously, is to get the additional area of living space, and it included, you know, having to shift around the pool, which is located in a kind of awkward space, and put it down in the back on the center of the property, but half tucked in under the house.
So what's the current living space?
Do we have those numbers? I know they're on the plan. There's the original site plan that we had up, had a chart with the.
Mark. The wetlands buffer to begin with is kind of separate from what we're asking for the house.
Mhm.
Probably easily achievable.
Mhm.
Do we want to hear Chick's comments on that so we can move past
You wanna cover that?
half of the property and focus on the house, which I have a few more problems.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, because it's just a wetlands issue. Yeah, we can do that. Not to lose our train of thought, maybe we're right to have Chick just balance out what you were saying about the wetlands buffer, and then just,
Before we go back to this?
yeah, and my apology, I was trying to get refocused on what we did 4 months ago, but Chick, do you want to respond to their suggestions about the buffer? Thank you.
Okay, I've been asked to come up to the microphone when I speak on these matters. Good evening, Chairman and members of the board. Chick Voorhees, environmental consultant to the village. First, I want to say that removing that eastern driveway segment was really a big improvement in my mind to the plan. So we do recognize that. I also wanted to mention that after one of the hearings, and this goes back a ways, but the board had asked me to prepare a detailed review of the application, just so we have a good baseline, and everything has been checked for consistency at the point when we get to a permit. So I didn't hear Mike address the NPV memo from August 30th. And that had some additional items. It did include the items that were brought up at the meeting, but there were some additional items that were mentioned. One thing that I was curious about is where the 50-foot came from for the purpose of establishing kind of an equivalent buffer, because the village code speaks to 125 foot, and there certainly are areas around the tennis court that appear to me to be not natural, that could also be part of a restoration effort. And that was identified in the August 20th memo, along with a few other things, just deer fencing to be removed, containment of stormwater, which may have been addressed by Mike already, consistency between the site plan and other plans as far as the sanitary system. We do see the existing vegetation inventory, and Mike did properly quote our conversations that I am in agreement with the wetlands line that is on the maps, and also that it could be more disruptive to remove some of the vegetation that's not invasive. So we did talk about those items. So I would just ask that the August 30th memo be addressed, and you know, one of the big items for me was that 125 foot. I do recognize that the house improvements are pretty minor, but there are opportunities to bring this into greater compliance with the 125 foot setback, and I'd just like to see some additional efforts to expand the natural revegetation areas.
Thank you, Chick.
So first, Chick, I'm sorry I did not address that memo. I did not receive a copy of it yet. So And as far as the 50-foot wide buffer, we actually used an owner's guide to Lake Agawam prepared by Nelson Pope and Voorhees, which we found on the village website as the recommendation for the 50-foot wide buffer. While the landscape setback in terms of providing what the regulated area for landscaping is, all of the landscaping that is currently on the site is pre-existing, non-conforming. So I can understand that, but I'm just so that you know where our idea for the 50-foot came from, was the village website and a pamphlet prepared by the village's environmental planner. So I'm happy to address the other comments that are in your memo once I receive a copy of it from the building department, I suppose. So, thank you.
Just very quickly, the pamphlet for Lake Agawam I am very familiar with. The intent of that was to encourage homeowners with large lawns on Lake Agawam to replace those lawns with native vegetation, with the idea that a minimum 50-foot would be much greater protection than the existing large lawns that some of the homeowners have. A lot has transpired since that pamphlet was prepared. Of course, there's the Lake Agawam Conservancy. There are efforts for cleaning up the lake by a number of methods, but that was really the intent. It was not a regulatory document. It pertained specifically to Lake Agawam, and it was to encourage homeowners with existing rear lawns to replace them. So just for clarification, that may help.
And then, Chick, just for the record, you talked about 125 feet for this property?
That's the landscape setback in chapter 116.
Okay,
So it's really, to me, it's just kind of the baseline.
sure.
And of course, we recognize that there are pre-existing conditions, and this does provide some benefits, without a doubt. But, you know, I think we want to keep that 125 area in mind, and the board can weigh whether the benefits are achieving a greater environmental net benefit overall. And I think that it could be improved by expanding natural revegetation.
Mike, do you think that's feasible to infill some of the spots around the tennis court and?
Can you just bring up the re-veg plan again? Since it has an aerial photograph, I think it helps to
Cool.
put this into context. Yeah, if you can just zoom in. Yeah, thanks.
And also, I guess, where is 125 feet? I'm looking at the survey now. Approximately.
Probably 125 would wind up encompassing the, probably the northern side of the property. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, the front door-ish? No. Sorry, say that again?
Well, if this buffer here is 50,
Yep.
if we just doubled that roughly to get to 100,
Got
that
it.
would be around here.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Typically a wetlands buffer is I mean, as the name literally says, it's to buffer the wetlands from development, provide contiguous wetlands habitat, and ensure that the wetlands in a particular area are not negatively affected by the development. In looking to the east, those wetlands are separated by a driveway on the neighboring property. They were required to provide their own buffer there, but there is some separation, so it's not a contiguous area. So providing additional revegetation on that side, I don't see how, while I understand from a regulatory standpoint how it sounds like that would be good, I just don't see from a habitat and buffer standpoint why that would provide additional benefit to those wetlands in particular. And then as far as the wetlands to the north and to the west, it's sort of the same thing in terms of There's a road that separates the wetlands to the north, so replanting and revegetating the lawn between the tennis court and the road, I just don't necessarily see what wetland benefit that would provide. I guess if the board is going to request us to do that, then we can definitely look into it. I just don't see, from a wetland standpoint, what benefit that provides, considering the specific existing conditions that we have on the site. So, and if Chick wants to rebut that, obviously he can do that. So.
Cool.
So I think that it would be good for Mike to take a look at the memo, because we would like to at least establish the proper setbacks for, regulatory purposes. If the testimony is that the buffer as proposed is adequate, then this board can weigh that. I would say that it's not always, yes, there are intervening driveways. There's intervening Meadow Lane from the tidal wetlands to the north. But there's a lot of structure there that's within the area that, if it was being proposed now, would not be placed there. So I see it as kind of a habitat improvement for areas that are in proximity to the wetlands, that are within the 125-foot landscape setback. And there may be other benefits as well, just from the standpoint of stormwater dissipation, reducing perhaps what accumulates, and just generally improvement to the habitat as opposed to a lawn area, which can be a detriment if it's fertilized or treated in any way or irrigated. It's a non-natural condition that's within the 125-foot setback. So I would encourage the applicant to look at that and think of it in those terms, and see if there's something that could be improved.
Thanks, Chick.
Go back, Chairman, to your.
Okay?
I'm good.
You're
Good
good?
to go. Yeah, let's go. to
Yeah,
the
I just
house.
want to, let's go back to what's the benefit to the applicant, the basics.
So the CMX and the architect representing the client here, Sam Moses. The premise of the design was to stick within the existing footprint of the structure of the property. If anything, we even shaved back and increased and eliminated certain elements. This is a building that was built in stages. The original portion of it in the 82 mostly is intact on the northern side of the property. One-story porch was added on that side with a balcony above it. We're actually removing that and again reducing.
But can we get something on camera?
So-
Let's replace that, or?
Actually, I did prepare, if you remember, because this building is such a complicated design, I did prepare a series of
Mhm.
color renderings where there's 3 sets of drawings I'm going to show you. The first drawing on your left is the existing.
Wait, can we get this
structure.
on camera? Is that possible?
I'm gonna pull it up to you.
Okay, thank you.
It's also being recorded, the camera.
Okay. So Sabrina, if you could go ahead to the page where we have the 3D drawings, that's better you'll get a better understanding. The first, yes, that's it. So what you see here on your left is the existing. On the left is the existing structure. On the right, I've depicted the existing structure in red. Yellow items are what's going to be removed from the existing structure. And what you see in white or gray is what's being added. So to compare, for instance, what's existing and what's removed. That front porch in yellow, which is existing, is going to be removed. The porch to the right, which is existing, is going to be replaced, replacing the existing, the new entrance basically. And pretty much, with the exception of a bay window that you see on the right-hand side, and enclosure of an existing porch on the second floor, which is far right above the, what we call the garage actually, nothing else is changing on this side. Let's move on to the next photo, next drawing. So this is basic, actually no, go back one. Yeah, I just want to show you. So this is basically what's being proposed. And as you can see, that existing front entrance has been relocated, and the central entrance basically is emphasized here, which is what the original intent of the design was. Two garage bays are opened up, the existing footprint of the building at the ground level, and the above level covered porch is being enclosed with glass.
Okay, but so far, everything you're describing doesn't require any relief from us.
No, not on this side.
Right, okay, so
Not on
let's
this side.
get to
Let's
the,
move on
let's get
to
to
the
the,
back of the building.
right.
So the back of the building was added on to in the 90s. Again, you can see it on the left-hand side. It does not follow the same architecture of the building. It has multiple terraces at 3 different levels, the pool being the intermediate level. Upper level is at the 2nd floor level, and then the lower levels are opening up to ground level. We are basically using this existing footprint to occupy some of the expansion of the GFA, gross floor area of the building, into these areas. And in that process, actually, we're shaving back that distance from the Dolliver line. So if you go to the right-hand side, again, all the elements in yellow are going to be removed. The element in red is what's existing, and the element in white and gray is what's being proposed, which is covered porch in the rear of the building, extending basically the indoor spaces and providing some protection from the sun. The pool also is removed from the upper deck to the lower level, which you see over here. If you can move on to the next page, it will show you the result of that presented as such. So in short, the covered porch is what's being presented, the moving of the pool from the upper deck to the lower level. The staircase that connects the upper level to the lower level is at the same setback to the Dolliver line that we have existing stair, except it's shifted slightly to the west, just to provide a little bit more room between the pool and the staircase. But its setbacks from the Dolliver line is maintained exactly the same. And also its footprint is maintained the same. Overall, the lot coverage has not changed much. It's pretty much the same. If anything, we've reduced the lot coverage. The GFA has expanded, but again, within the footprint of the existing structure.
From what to what?
The GFA has expanded from to 11,254.
What is it now?
Right now, existing GFA is 7,650 now.
7,600 and,
50 now. But all this expansion is within the existing lot coverage footprint. No new territory has been proposed to be built. If anything, as I said, by removal of those decks, we've increased the setback to the Dolliver line.
well, that's what I'm trying to see, where it says a proposed one-story addition to be set back 43 feet from the Dolliver Dune crest setback. Can we just
Sure, if you go
segregate
back-
what that is, that one-story addition, which is,
That's the staircase that comes down from the 2nd level to the existing. And if you go to the existing drawing, simply now. Please. Pull back up. Yeah, okay. So if you enlarge the the right, you can see in yellow the staircase that connects the upper deck to the lower level. Immediately to the right of that is a gray area. That's the new stair, replacing the existing stair, but with the same setback to the Dolliver line.
So this is reversed, so, ocean is,
The ocean
Mhm.
is right now at the top of the screen. The staircase going down from the upper level, existing is in yellow. Proposed is immediately to its right in gray.
So Brandon, can you just go to the survey real quick?
And basically, this line that you
Oh,
see,
sorry.
this line that you see over here is the new porch extension. That's the existing. So we're actually pushing back the proposed porch further back from the Dolliver.
Okay, so the gray porch is is proposed and the yellow was the existing.
Removed.
Okay. Just making sure it was on the mic. So that's what I was really saying. So,
Very
sorry.
Walkway.
Julia, we didn't hear
Julie,
you.
is that you?
Yes, I'm asking about this very, very, very long walkway that goes out to the beach.
Yes,
It's-
that's an existing walkway. We're not removing it, we're not
It's existing
redesigning
now?
it. Pardon me?
It is there now, yes.
Yes, it is there now.
Okay.
And under the coastal erosion regulations, we're actually required to have an elevated walkway that takes us over the dunes. Because foot traffic otherwise would potentially damage the dune over time.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to bring this up just to highlight that, and we had provided this in our initial application, but the existing, so we looked at lot coverage within the 100-foot Dolliver Dune Crest setback. And the existing lot coverage within that is 3,913 square feet. Our proposed coverage in that has reduced to 3,622 square feet. So we've reduced coverage within the Dolliver Dune Crest by 291 square feet without increasing any setback. We're actually holding at the 42.4 foot setback. So we're not getting any closer, and we're reducing the amount of coverage that's in there. So to put it in perspective in terms of what's actually, from a village code perspective, we're trying to reduce some of that. So I hope that helps.
Should I?
So the existing lot coverage is what? Just compare before and after on lot coverage.
There we go. Yes. So existing lot coverage is, existing coverage is 16,861, total existing coverage. And total proposed coverage is 17,137
for the whole site.
for the whole site.
For the dollar.
Within the Dolliver, there's a reduction of that coverage.
Well, it's a 291. It's almost I mean,
It's
it's not real.
it's
It's 291 feet, you're saying. You're reducing lot coverage
of
in the
lot
dollar.
coverage within proximity of the Dolliver.
I mean, it's not-
Yes.
It's not anything.
We pretty much, to your point, Mark, we're using the existing footprint of the house.
Right.
And just cleaning it up.
And for the most part, and correct me if this isn't the gist of what you're doing, you're basically taking existing footprint and you're creating interior habitable space with it.
With portions
That's how
of
you-
it,
because
not
you're-
all of it. A good portion of it on the upper level is still the porch, the covered porch, but in the lower level, yes, that's correct.
No, because it looks like I mean, this is more than a 50% increase in the size of this house. So you must be, and you're
No,
not,
I
well,
don't
you're going
think-
from 7,659 to 11,254. Is that right?
For GFA.
Yeah.
Let me just go over to GFA one more time. Total existing GFA, I told you 7,427.
7,427?
Yes, 7,427. Total proposed GFA 10,075.
Okay, that's not what we were just,
No, that is.
What was the
7427.
11,000 figure you quoted
That was,
to us a
that
minute
was
ago?
old, we basically, the survey is the most accurate.
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
the survey is the most accurate. I brought the old drawing, unfortunately.
What, yeah,
That's why.
what he was quoting was the existing versus proposed total lot coverage for the entire site. So on the survey, we separated out the total lot coverage for the entire site, which would include the dune walkway, it includes the tennis court. But because the Dollar Dune Crest was a separate thing, we wanted to make sure that the board had that information. So we've provided both of those. So what I said before was the lot coverage within the Dollar line, and what he just said was the lot coverage for the entire site.
GFA for the site.
GFA
Lot
Well, I'm sorry, when he was
coverage.
pointing at the survey,
Okay.
he was saying the coverage. What he just said, the 7,427
Based on what, 36%
to
what?
10,075, that's GFA.
GFA, I
Oh,
understand.
yeah, okay. So you went
Okay,
36%.
so an addition of 3,000 square
3,000.
feet,
From
okay.
7427 to
Yes,
Right.
075.
7,400 to, it's a 2,500 addition.
What's the allowable GFA?
Allowable GFA is, allowable GFA is,
It would be the max in this
21,845,
case.
which is max 18,000,
18,000,
correct.
because we've got so much property towards the
Correct.
water. Okay.
How wide is this lot?
This lot is, 153.
153?
152.26.
And how far is it to the Dollar line?
Forty-
Which portion? The
42
closest-
feet to the pool.
42 unchanged, which is the staircase going from the upper level.
No,
to
I'm
the-
sorry, the distance from the road to the Dollar line.
Oh, from the road to the Dollar line is. The building, 37, to the Dollar line.
600 something.
It's, to the front of the building is 37, the building itself is about, just for a second.
It's not shown anywhere on any survey?
From the road to the
Yeah.
Dollar line. The building itself is. Hundred plus, plus, 237 spot, 237 plus 43, that's, I'll confirm the exact number, but it's, approximately 390 change. The dollar line. 270, close to 390. 390.
CMAC or maybe Tony, do you want to summarize this in the context of the 5 points?
We went through them the last time, but obviously we think the character of the community is only gonna get better as a result of the improvements to the, you always have to look at, you're doing a renovation like this, the overall package, and, you know, the pre-existing conditions are what they are as far as the wetlands are going. And so the package that we put together is to try to create a net plus site where the environmental benefits certainly are more of an improvement than whatever additional space that we're picking up, but it's a win-win for the applicant too, because that's the only reason it's justifiable to do all this work. So, given the existing conditions, we think that it's a net positive for the character of the community. As far as the alternatives, we talked about how the site is what it is. It's got the tension between the wetlands lines pushing us as far south as possible and creating that buffer problem. And the Dolliver line pushing us as far north as possible. And so you're sort of stuck with what we're doing, which is to try to create the space in as compact a footprint as we can, which is shaving back as much as we can, filling in the negative space, and getting as much use out of it as we can. So there's no alternatives there. And if you recall what we talked about when it comes to the substantiality question, which is really the big one as far as the Dolliver line goes, everything's in a context, which in this case, if you remember, sorry for the one board member who wasn't around back then, but there was a historic change that occurred on this particular area of the village where the Dolliver line was set as a dune crest line. It wasn't, at the time it wasn't arbitrary, but because it was set to become the standard line, what happened over decades was the beach grew and grew and grew hundreds of yards. And so I remember Alex had put up on the screen the aerials showing how much the actual dune crest the primary dune crest has been growing and growing and growing. And so if the Dolliver line didn't exist and it was measured as against the true dune crest, we wouldn't need any variance at all. And so that's the context that we had asked you to consider, was that, you know, from a technical standpoint, we need the variance from the Dolliver line.
Alex, would you agree that if you read the section of the code that relates to the Dolliver line, it's sort of like a living language, but the Dolliver line itself has come to be a set line in the sand, not really in line with the intent of the actual language?
So in most places in the village, the setbacks are measured to the crest of the dune. When this area first became developed in the 1970s, on this end of Medellin, there were no houses here at all. It was just open beach, and it was determined too difficult to determine where the crest of dunes were. So they had this Dolliver line survey done, I think it was in the mid-1980s, to establish a point that could be used for zoning purposes, for lack of a better term, to establish where that is. But as we know, the actual crest of dune has evolved significantly since then.
Right, okay.
Did that answer your question?
That is, and now that you say, I think it was actually another applicant who had given us the code snip of the language, but yeah.
Yeah, it was
question.
put in place because it was thought at the time too difficult to determine, because there wasn't a lot of, I guess, reference points there. It was just kind of open area.
CMAC, do you have a diagram that shows the possible allowable building envelope on the property?
I can easily put that together. As far as allowable, you're talking about lot coverage or GFA?
No, just a footprint where you could build.
Well,
Could you clarify what
yeah,
parameters, because it's complicated.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is,
if you met the Dolliver line and you met the wetland setbacks line, I'm not sure there is any envelope. But
no, I mean, if
Wait,
that's
no,
the
no, you would
if
have
that's the case,
You would have an envelope if you.
with the
just
100, with the
yeah,
full
just go 100
wetland
feet.
setbacks plus the Dolliver line,
Yeah,
it'd
but
be-
don't you have are you affected by the wetland setback in your house?
No, not on the north side, no.
Right.
Tony,
So
if that were the
that's
case,
what he's asking.
The main variance is this Dolliver line crossing through the middle of our.
Right.
what I'm getting at is feasible alternatives, and if, like you say, there really is no buildable envelope, then that really sort of suggests that there are no feasible alternatives.
Well, there's no feasible alternatives to get additional living space, which is what the benefit that we're seeking, right? It's always
Right.
It's a feasible alternative to achieve the benefit sought, which is some additional living space for the applicant. We're not gonna destroy the front of the house, which is the only other theoretical place you could push it, which
Right.
would also require pushing the driveway and pushing everything else.
Right.
So,
closer to the wetlands.
so trying to pick up that space within the existing footprint at the back of the house is
I understand the
how we're
strategy.
achieving that benefit.
I understand the strategy. It's just that the front of the house is so different from the back of the house.
It is, and that's one of the things that we've tried to do to kind of quiet down the classism of the front of the house.
Sure.
And bring back and also bring some order to the haphazard growth in the back of the house.
Right.
That porch also in that process provides not only some protection, shelter, and privacy for the residents at our client's space, but also privacy to the neighboring properties. Being that this is a long, narrow lot, outdoor activity, for instance, as an example, the pool, original pool on the second deck was completely exposed to the neighbor to the west when they were activity up there.
Right.
Now, not only the pool has been shifted down to the lower level, but that activity on the upper level, that is a porch, is enclosed and provides basically sidelines and protection to the
understand.
neighboring properties, both sides in that sense.
If I remember correctly, your intervention inside the house is pretty substantial
On the ground level.
on the ground
On
level.
the ground level,
Right.
yes.
So I
This
mean,
is not
you could go north.
We could go north if we abandon the structure completely, and then, but the drawback, as Tony said, is that we're basically pushing everything with that, the driveway and everything onto the wetlands.
Closer to the
wetlands, which
wetlands.
is pretty tight on that side. If you look at this drawing over here, these are the
have a comparison
setbacks
map that we
of
had
the
submitted with the
wetlands.
original application.
Yeah.
And, Mark, just to answer your question, about the distance between the front lot line and the Dolliver line, there is actually a little diagram, on the survey, and on average, when you measure the both sides, it's about 390 feet between the two.
CMAC was right.
Yeah.
Nice.
So over here, the
This was the
green
previously
and the blue
proposed plan,
dotted
obviously.
lines are the setbacks at 125, 150, and the 200 from the wetland
For sanitary.
for sanitaries.
right.
And then that orange line that you see is the 100-foot setback from the Dolliver.
Yes. So
Crossing
Tony is correct. If this were a new house, you'd be very limited
Correct.
in your buildable envelope.
Especially because you also, for any house, have to fit a septic system somewhere. So it's not
Yes.
just the house, it's also the fact that we would not be able to meet the house, the 100-foot dune crest setback for the house and its septic system, because it just wouldn't be
But
feasible.
as Mike said, we do have the 100-foot Dolliver setback. But if you really look at the relationship of that Dolliver to the crest of Dune and the ocean, we have basically two sets of high points between that and
I understand. I agree.
I think that's what I had previously shown when we were looking at the older aerials.
Yes. And historically, based on the cuts in the Shinnecock Bay, to the east of the cut, the beaches have been growing, the beach fronts are expanding, contrary to the west side of it. So this property in time has expanded.
Yes.
I think I'm fine. I don't have any more questions.
So, Mark.
Thank you.
Julia.
Not at this time.
Okay. Do you have more? Otherwise, we'll adjourn for all purposes and come
No, I
back with
think
some
we,
more questions.
we obviously want to take a look at Mr. Voorhees' memo and address that. I think the adjournment gives you guys time to get whatever clarity you want. And we're not putting any English on that issue. That seems to be an issue that's
It's an
more.
interagency thing. It has nothing to do
Right,
with
and as you know, we applied for it. So whatever happens, happens.
We'll get
As far
there.
as the relief requested is concerned, but, is there anything else that you specifically want us to take a look at between now and then? Because it would be nice to wrap this up and get you whatever information you want.
Is there anything you can think of, Julia, or we can always send a note later?
And I'll be happy to have you over at the site if you need to take a look at it, get a better idea. Because coming there, you'd really get a good idea of the scale and distances to the
Yeah,
ocean and
maybe
so forth.
we'll take you up on that.
If the board likes, we often coordinate site visits through our office.
Say that again?
We often coordinate site visits through the building department, if that's something that the board would like.
Yeah, we'll reach out and
Yeah.
get something going.
It almost, when you're there and you see how big that dune really is, the dune system, it's essentially like a triple dune system now. And so when you are evaluating the Dolliver variance request, which is really the big one as far as the zoning request is concerned, you kind of need to see that to put the context in it as to, you know, what was originally intended by that Dolliver line versus what's actually there today.
I agree, and
It's-
stick around, you're gonna hear a lot about the Dolliver line tonight, but I agree.
So,
It's something that might.
We'd
wanna
love
be
it if you guys
revisited.
could go there and take a look at that, because that really does put the context on it.
Okay.
So I'll motion to adjourn for all purposes. Can I have a second?
Until the next meeting?
Oh, wait, we didn't ask if there's anybody from the
good
public,
call.
so I'm sorry. Is there anybody from the public who
And-
wishes to be heard?
And Mr. Chairman,
You're off?
if I may, with my apologies, if I may be excused.
Thank you very much.
If Mr. Borky, thank you very much.
You're passing the baton?
I'm passing the baton to Mr. Borky.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Okay, does anybody from the public wish to be heard with respect to case number 3156 Eiffel Residence LLC, 2020 Meadow Lane? Is there anybody online or, okay. Then I'll motion to close for all purposes, adjourn for all purposes. Case number 3156, 2020 Meadow Lane, can I have a
To
second?
October 26th?
And we'll adjourn to October 26th, 2023. Thank you, Alex.
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Board.
Thank you. So next, we do have case number 3158, 1430 Meadow Lane. I don't know if there's more to. Anything you need on this? 1430 Meadow Lane, or we've
No,
got,
I don't think so.
we've got what we need?
Should I proceed?
If you'd like, yeah, we probably have everything we need, but
Great.
go ahead.
Thanks. My name is John Bennett. Bailey Larkin from my office is here as well, as Bruce Brown, the project architect. When we were last here, the board had questions regarding the foundation plan for the proposed addition that was submitted, and also on-site parking issues. When I say issues, just where the on-site parking was going to go in a conforming location. So we did submit a site plan demonstrating that 10 parking spaces can easily be accommodated on the site without any need for zoning relief. Of course, then that's pretty obvious that it can comply with the town code. So no foul, no harm there. And then in addition, there was a question as it related to some structural plans, whether or not there was going to be any piling, any new piles had to be driven south of the coastal erosion hazard line, and we did submit revised structural plans by Delandro Andros Engineering dated August 9th, 2023, demonstrating that no piles south of the coastal erosion hazard line are required to construct the proposed addition. So we do not need any relief south of the coastal. We don't need any coastal erosion hazard line relief or variances. I actually had confirmed this in a discussion I had with Mr. Tinhoso the other day. So unless there's anything else that the board would like to see, I would just remind the board this is a minimal request. We're over 290 feet from the road. Support letters from the neighbors on either side, and as I gave you before, substantial authority that this itself is probably the best determinant of the fact that the project will not impact have a negative effect on the on the character of the neighborhood. So at this time, unless the board has any other questions, we'd simply ask the board to close the public hearing for written decision.
Julia, do you have any questions?
Not at this time.
Well, we may be closing it for decision, so,
Yes.
okay,
Prepared for that.
So ask now.
you good? Okay, so I'll motion to close case number 3158, 1430 Meadow Lane for decision. Can I have a second?
Second.
And all in favor of closing it for decision? Julia, you with us?
Yes.
Okay,
Thanks.
so that's
Aye.
unanimous.
Aye.
Thank you.
The board has 62 days.
Thank you, John. So moving on, we have case number 3164, Robert Kornstein and Sherry Gottesman, 43 Bailey Road. Julia, you'll take over from here. Luke and I are recusing ourselves, and we'll be back shortly.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Who's here this evening for the applicant?
My name is John Bennett. Bennett and Reed, 212 Windmill Lane, Southampton. Bailey Larkin from the firm is also with me, as is Robert Kornstein, who is one of the applicants. So our client is proposing to construct a pool pavilion consisting of a fully enclosed powder room that is 30 square feet in size. It's a roofed but unenclosed area that's connected to the powder room. I'm not saying this is exactly the scale, but it's pretty close. Oh, it is? Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me. Oh, that's right. Mr. Kornstein's in the construction business. I'm sorry. I apologize. It is a scale model then. Our client seeks an interpretation of the building inspector wherein the building inspector determined that the square footage of the roof but unenclosed area of this structure is calculated in the gross floor area. We think he's demonstrably wrong. So what I have for everybody, if I may, John, I have a copy for you.
Excellent, thank you.
Mr. Bennett, unfortunately, I'm not able to receive these documents this evening.
That's okay. If you want, maybe the easiest thing
You could email me.
Email her? You can email her a PDF, can't you?
is simply to go to the zoning code. It's all in 116.17.1 on your iPhone or electronic device. I shouldn't use a brand name. I'm sorry. But in any event, so as I said in my letter, I think TIN is confusing square foot area, which is a term of art in the code, with gross floor area. And it's a pretty axiomatic concept of statutory determination that you don't interpret words that make them meaningless, number one. And number two, there's legion of case law that says this, that zoning law, including 3 Court of Appeals cases, zoning law is in derogation of common law rights, and zoning codes are to be construed against the municipality. So I don't think there's any ambiguity whatsoever here, but even if there were, you'd have to construe it against the municipality, and I think you'll easily be able to find that that the zoning code says the exact opposite of what the building department is saying. So what I'm saying is, even assuming arguendo that Mr. Hosso is right about the term building area, gross floor area is a separate term. Thus, while the overall size of an accessory structure, even assuming he's correct, is limited by the definition of square foot area, the maximum gross floor area of these structures is only reduced by specifically defined gross floor area. So what that means is only 30 square feet of this pavilion is supposed to be included in the gross floor area. How do we get to that definition? It's very, very, very straightforward in the zoning code, which I handed out. Let me find my own copy. Section 116-17.1 says, and some of this is I'm just reading into the record, but that's really, the language speaks for itself. The term gross floor area of a dwelling shall include total gross horizontal area of all floors of a dwelling, measured to the exterior of the outside walls, including the horizontal floor of any enclosed breezeway type structure that is a part of the dwelling, and the horizontal floor area of any enclosed porch, but excluding the following: any floor area under the roof of a roof porch, deck, patio, balcony, or similar roof structure attached to the dwelling shall be excluded in calculating gross floor area, provided that the roof, porch, deck, patio, balcony, or other similar roof structure is not enclosed so as to be habitable space. So as graphically illustrated here, with the exception of this little powder room, you can pass that around, it's not very good.
Can't see it.
You can't see it?
Nope, it's in your hand,
Where's
so
the
I can't
camera? Where am I doing?
John,
Above
leave it on the
that.
table,
Above that.
and then,
see it on the table.
and we just need you in the microphone so
need to
Julia
be-
can hear
yeah.
you.
What I'm trying to show you. I
But
don't
you're
know if-
blocking her camera, I think.
Sorry.
You have to, Jen, leave it on the table and don't move it.
Well, what I'm trying to show is that with the exception of this little powder room,
And then speak into the
Yeah.
microphone,
None
if
of
you
it.
don't mind.
back there, it's hard enough for me to think myself.
You want me to tell you where to put it?
Excuse me? No, I think I've got it.
That's a little.
I'm moving it around so that I
confused
can
right now.
show
Okay,
Julia.
now I can see
John,
it.
John,
Got it?
if you move it, they can't capture it on camera.
Okay. Only the powder room is enclosed. Only
Right.
the powder room is treated, what's the word, Bailey, what's the word? Conditioned space, that only the powder room. So everything else, while it may be included in the, may be included in, what's that term again? So,
Building area?
in the.
GFA or?
No, that's the whole point, it's not included in the GFA. It may be included in what Tin calls the, what is it called? Building area, which is one term of art. In other words, the unenclosed, all of the even unenclosed area may be included in the building area. It's not included in the GFA. And so then Tin says, well, what you just read only applies to principal structures.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the whole basis of his argument is. But if you look down to 116, 17.1, let me get it right. E3, it says, it's the intent of subsection E to reduce the minimum gross floor area of dwellings in the R40, R20, R12.5, and R7.5 residence districts and the M420 multiple family residence district by the gross floor area of accessory buildings on the lot calculated as set forth herein, calculated as herein set forth, which sends you back to the way you calculate gross floor area, which excludes area under the roof of a roof, porch, deck, patio, balcony, or similar roof structure shall be excluded. So what they did about a couple of years ago is they, in certain zones, let me back up, because the history of this code has been changed and changed and changed so much more. For 30 years I knew this code, it was really changed, but in the last 10 years it's been changed. Change seems like it changes every second. It used to be that accessory structures were not covered in terms of gross floor area. They weren't included in the gross floor area of principal structures. Then the code was changed to say that in certain zones, and they're essentially the smaller zones, the R40, the R20, the R12.5, the R7.5, you have to include the gross floor area of accessory structures, pool house, stuff like that. You have to include the gross floor area of accessory structures in the gross floor area cap, the GFA cap. And that's what section 116.17.1 E3 says, the one I just read to you. So in these zones, you include the gross floor area of the accessory structure within the gross floor area cap for the principal buildings. Okay. But what it does say is there's by the total gross floor area of an accessory building on the lot calculated as herein set forth. And what does herein set forth mean? It's calculated as taking out the area under the roof or roof porch, deck, patio, balcony, or other similar roof structures. So Tin's suggestion that removal of roof, porch, deck, patio, balcony, or other roof structure from GFA, he's suggesting that only applies to when you calculate the principal structure GFA, is totally disproven, blown apart by the fact that when they put the GFA from accessory structures back into the GFA in these zones, it says calculated as herein set forth. That's the way you calculate GFA. You calculate GFA as you take out the unconditioned space. Otherwise, that word has, these words have no meaning. And to the extent that there's any ambiguity, the ambiguity falls in the homeowner's favor. That's no question. But we also have a case, Baker versus Town of Islip Zoning Board of Appeals, in which a municipality, in that case Islip, was trying by implication to say that gross floor area of a certain area of a dwelling was not what had to be included in the GFA, and the second department clearly said, you know, it can't, limitations on GFA, in that case it was called FAR, but it's the same thing, may not be extended by implication. So TIN's implying that these limitations on calculation of GFA only apply to principal structures, but that's simply not the case, because the language says you're supposed to calculate it. The very code section that creates these GFA requirements says that you're supposed to calculate it as it is calculated in the statute. So I don't know where TIN gets that leap that this language on limitation of GFA doesn't apply to accessory structures, because it simply does. So that's the one aspect of it. I can answer any questions on that interpretation argument if you'd like.
I'd like to ask if actually if the still photo of the scale model could be taken down so I could actually see the room, if that's possible. Because I'd like to actually ask Mr. Borquin if he could shed any light on,
Absolutely. Okay.
this time for us before I ask the board for their questions as well.
So just for clarity, are you asking first just to have the view of the room restored on camera?
Yes, and we have done, that was done, but now I've just lost it again.
Would you
No, I
mind if can you hear me? Am I audible?
Hear you and see you, yes.
Okay.
The view of the room. What was that? Oh, was the
That's
floor
the
plan?
stair.
No, just the
And now I can see I can see the
Sorry.
council now.
Sorry, John.
Great, thank you. So I thank you, Mr. Bennett, for bringing the printout. That was thoughtful. My only point for clarification is I am looking at on page 2, so that would be 116-17.1E. E is in Edward, and that was the section that was noticed tonight. So I'm looking at, it gives somewhat of a formula. The maximum gross floor area of a dwelling within the R40 inter alia districts shall be 10% of the lot area of the lot, plus 1,500 square feet, less the total gross floor area of accessory buildings on the lot, calculated in accordance with the following provisions. So I don't have in front of me, and I can probably look in the Dropbox, what the total GFA of the principal dwelling is and how we factor that in with the GFA of the accessory structure.
Okay, if you include the whole thing in, it's over by 371 feet. If you include the entire structure, no, we're over by 371, or minus the 30, Bailey, or? If you include the entire, if you were to include the entire, if you were follow TIN's, interpretation that whole structure has to be included, 371, we'd be over by 371 square feet. That's, I'm gonna present the variance aspect of it next.
That was my next question.
Yeah, but, so in the alternative, I mean, whenever I ask for an interpretation, and I think it's a very strong case here, but I nevertheless asked for a variance as well, and I was gonna put that case in next.
Because my only concern in regard to the interpretation, looking at it from an interpretation lens, is looking at 116.17a and B. They're discussing the gross floor area of the dwelling, the principal dwelling. So if I'm jumping over to E,
Right.
what I just read out, the section E itself, and then the caveats are for excluding the detached garages. And I don't see anything, and obviously correct me if there's something in the code that I'm missing, which allows us to exclude an outbuilding or an accessory structure.
No, I'm glad you brought that to everyone's attention, because What I'm saying, it doesn't come from that. If this building was totally enclosed by, exterior walls and all conditioned space, I would have no argument, because it would be included. What I'm saying is that only 30 feet of it, that's the powder room, is included, because by definition, that's how you calculate gross floor area as opposed to square foot area. There are two separate sections. I can have, in certain zones, I can only have a 520 square foot accessory structure, and in other zones, with the larger zones, I can only have an 800 square feet structure. I'm not arguing that. This is less than the 520 in terms of that limitation. But what I'm saying is how much of it is included in the gross floor area, and that is only that powder room.
So that's in.
And that keeps me under the GFA.
So that.
And how do I get there? Because it says you have to include into the GFA these gross floor area, these accessory buildings. The total gross floor area of accessory buildings on the lot calculated as herein set forth. Where is gross floor area
So
calculated?
you're. I'm sorry. So you were reading that from the very bottom,
The very
subsection
bottom.
3, E3.
Where is gross floor area calculated? It's calculated in A, and A removes the unconditioned space.
My only concern with that is that A uses the word or the term of art dwelling, which under the code, and from what I'm understanding,
Yeah.
a dwelling is kitchen, bathroom, sleeping.
Yeah, but look
John, you're talking at
look at-
17.1A3.
The intent of section E to reduce the maximum gross floor area of dwellings, again, it uses the word, in the R40, R20, R20, 12.5, R75, blah, 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 by the total gross floor area of accessory buildings on the lot, calculated as set forth herein. Where else is gross floor area calculated? It's calculated to exclude these areas of space. And to the extent that you think that's an ambiguity, well, that falls in my favor. There's legions of case law that I don't think it's ambiguous.
And we understand that.
Yeah.
We understand that.
But what, should
Actually,
I proceed with the variance aspect of it, or what do you want me to do?
Do you,
Hold on, Julia has a question.
I
Oh, I'm
actually-
sorry, Julie.
Actually, I had asked Mr. Borkwin for his interpretation, and then I was going to ask the board members for theirs. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Kempner, do you have any questions?
No, I don't.
Mrs. Giffra, do you have any questions?
No, I mean, just for a matter of clarification for our procedure, is that, are we going to ask counsel for his interpretation of this, statute or this zoning regulation? And then depending on what your thoughts are, then is this coming to the crux of the issues, whether Mr. Bennett will then need to come back and apply for a variance based upon?
Mr. Bennett's already asked for a
We're
variance.
I've been doing this for 40 years. Every time the building inspector in the town of Southampton, the village of Southampton, every village out here, what happens is you go in and you ask for, if you disagree with the interpretation of the building inspector, you go in, you file, you object to it. It's on the very same application form. And then you say, in the alternative.
No,
Really?
really, okay,
Okay.
I'm not questioning your expertise, I know it
No,
very
no,
well.
it's a
When
procedural question.
When I'm just
Yeah.
asking as a procedural question to get clarification, I assume that was the case, but I just wanna
Okay.
make sure that we have a lot of information here, so I just wanna make sure that I understand how we're proceeding, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that's all I meant is I was hoping to clarify the procedural issue.
So
That's
we're
it.
just
gonna
wanna-
have Jeff clarify the legal issue for us.
We can have Jeff
That's
as
what-
your.
Well, that's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
get to, I'm
So,
sorry if
but-
I wasn't that articulate about it.
Oh, no. But while I'm here, and every board out here does this, including this board historically, let me, for purposes of quasi-judicial economy, because there's a quasi-judicial board, I'll just put the variance case in. It'll take a couple seconds, that's all.
And before we do that, I just want to remind the board and the public, 'cause it's been a while, the building inspector's interpretation is spelled out in a letter dated May 25th,
Oh.
2023. So hopefully you have that as part of your file, since I know we have some changes to the
So just to clarify, and Mr. Bennett can I don't want to speak on your behalf, so stop me if I'm wrong. What Mr. Bennett is bringing in front of this board is a request for us to review the interpretation of the building inspector, which we have the rights to do. And in the event that we do not agree with the building inspector, that we have, and we have the power to do so, that we can grant him a variance, or grant his applicant rather a variance to maintain the structure as
Well,
is, or
to
to
build
build the
it,
structure
build
as
it.
is.
Build
Okay.
it, build it. It's not there.
I actually wanted to ask, I had a question and I also had a request. The request I have is, Alex, is it possible for you to read Tian's letter into the record? I think that would be helpful this evening.
Sure, I can do that.
Well, and then the question I had is whether or not there are, whether or not the structure is a conditioned structure, whether the building has footings already that are part of the structure that were mentioned.
I didn't hear the whole question.
She asked
I'm
if the
sorry.
building had footings that were part of the structure.
Bennett, we can go on with the variance request.
Okay.
Just for clarity, are you trying to ask, has work been begun on the building, or?
No.
Oh, I was actually asking how complete a structure it is, whether or not it's a conditioned structure.
Only the 30 square foot. Excuse me? No, only the powder room. But it's enclosed, so whether or not it's conditioned or not, I believe, to be frank and honest about my keeping square with my interpretation, that the enclosed area, conditioned or not, so I may have misspoken in terms of being conditioned, but so I guess you're gonna drain the pipes in the wintertime, because in the powder room. So, but the enclosed area, I think unquestionably is part of the GFA. I mean, that's the whole crux of my argument, that the enclosed, fully enclosed area, not the open area, is part of the GFA.
And to clarify, the enclosed area could not be heated because it's an accessory structure.
Oh, that's right. Thank you very much. I thank you. It could be air conditioned, which is strange. It can't be heated, but interestingly enough, there's a little bit of a tidbit here. It can have a fireplace. Not that there's one proposed, but interestingly enough, there's
Now
been
there
an
will be.
interpretation for many years that an accessory structure cannot have central heating.
Nice roaring
but
fire.
But it can have a fireplace. Not that you're going to do that, but I just thought the board might find that there's a sort of nerdy little things I find interesting. I'm sorry.
No heating, cooking, or sleeping, I think, is the language
Exactly.
that the building department uses.
No heating, cooking, or sleeping. It can be air conditioned, and you can have a fireplace. But no one's one is not in this 30-square foot room proposed.
Alex, would you go ahead and read the letter that Tian prepared in May for the record?
Sure. So this is the letter dated May 25th, 2023 that the board members should have in their file from the building inspector. It says, Dear Mr. Greenwald and members of the board, please accept this letter as an explanation of my interpretation of the zoning ordinance with respect to this case as reflected in the attached denial letter. Section 116(9A)(1)B of the zoning ordinance limits square foot area of accessory buildings to a maximum of 520 square feet in zones R20 and below, and 800 square feet in zoning districts R40 and up. It has been the policy of this department to include all roofed accessory buildings towards the square foot area limit, whether enclosed by walls or not. This is consistent with the definition of building area of, as defined in 1116(2), the area computed at the maximum horizontal cross-section of the main accessory buildings on a lot, including the area of all roofed porches, terraces, and similar features. And that last part is underlined, emphasis added. For example, in an R40 district, a 600 square foot pool house could have a maximum of a 200 square foot roofed porch attached for a total of 800 square feet, assuming other requirements were met. Pergolas with open trellis or lattice roofs and similar structures open to the sky would generally not be counted towards the square foot area of accessory structures. This definition and interpretation of calculating area of accessory structures has also been applied for the purposes of calculating lot coverage pursuant to 116.11.2, as well as gross floor area pursuant to 116.17.1. Section 116.17.1a specifically describes how GFA is calculated for dwellings, and in particular, 116.17.1a3 excludes any floor area under the roof of a of a roofed porch, deck, patio, balcony, or similar roof structure attached to the dwelling. And those last four words are underlined, attached to the dwelling. The language in this provision specifically applies to dwellings, but not accessory structures. Inclusion of the accessory structures in the GFA provisions is regulated by 116.17.1E, which states that the maximum gross floor area of a dwelling within the R40, R20, R12.5, R7.5 residence districts and the MF20 shall be 10% of the lot area of the lot plus 1,500 square feet, less the total gross floor area of accessory buildings, that last part being underlined, on the lot, calculated in accordance with the following provisions. Those provisions that follow only allow for two specific exclusions of the floor area of attached garage up to 520 square feet in certain districts, or up to 800 square feet in R40. Accordingly, the building department's policy has only been to allow these exclusions for detached garages that do not contain other uses. The code does not enumerate other GFA exclusions with respect to any other accessory structures. Therefore, in calculating the total gross floor area of accessory buildings pursuant to 116.17.1E, other than detached garages, it is the policy of the building department to count all roofed areas of accessory buildings in accordance with the definition of building area of from 116.2 and the interpretation of square foot area of accessory buildings as described above. As a result, the denial letter for 43 Bailey Road reflects a total calculated proposed GFA of 4,270.4 square feet, which included the 371 square foot roofed pavilion shown on the plan with the date there, with a lot size of 24,297 square feet. The maximum allowable GFA would be 3,930 square feet, which is 340.4 square feet less than is proposed, including the proposed 3,899.4 square foot two-story house. Note that the architect's calculation on page PH 10 include only 30 square feet of accessory structure for the proposed bathroom within the proposed pool pavilion towards the total GFA calculation. And that's signed Tin Hoso, Chief Building Inspector, and includes the denial letter as an attachment.
Okay, well, I explained in a much briefer way what Tim's position was, but as the fatal flaw in his interpretation lies in his very interpretation. And as I said in my letter in response, which I respectfully ask you to read, it's a 3-page letter with authority as well as case law attached on August 3rd, 2023. Square foot area and gross floor area are two specific terms, and the building inspector is promiscuously interchanging them. He says, yes, you have limitations, but he defines them as coming out of the square foot area limitations. There's a square foot area limitations for accessory structures in the various zones. In the smaller zones, it's 520 square feet. In the larger zones, it's 800 square feet. But square foot area and gross floor area are not the same. And the only place you find in the code a definition of gross floor area is in the introductory, in 116-17.1A, which expressly excludes the areas that are not enclosed. So he can't mix and match, because zoning codes have very specific terms of art. Yes, it's limited in square foot area, and then when you limit the square foot area, you throw in the whole thing, all of that. But when you define gross floor area, it has to be calculated as set forth herein, and he's conveniently ignoring that. There's a direction in the code to calculate gross floor area as set forth herein. The only place that gross floor area is calculated is in A, and you can't say, oh, well, that just deals with dwellings, because E3 again talks about maximum gross floor area of dwellings by taking out the gross floor area of accessory buildings. So they're intertwined, and it's only defined in one area. I don't know. It seems like there's no other possible explanation or interpretation if you read the clear letter of the clear letter of the law. He's mixing apples and oranges. I have no argument with the size of these accessory structures are limited by the overall size or limited by the square foot area limitations, but only that limits the overall size of them. The amount of those accessory structures that are then included in the maximum gross floor area of dwellings is only those areas that are defined as gross floor area. There are even references, when it talks about what you include in accessory buildings, it talks about how you're calculating the area of the dwelling, as defined, as calculated herein, set forth herein. You know, you'd have to read the words of a dwelling and as calculated, as set forth herein, out of section 116-17.1 E3. That's the only way you get there. And you know, there was never an intent. Every place you look at in the code where gross floor area is, it's enclosed area. Now you're mixing apples and oranges by saying, oh, well, it's included in the definition of square foot area. But no, that has its own separate definition. It directs you how to calculate gross floor area. It's right in the code. I don't understand the dispute at all. And I'm not being, sarcastic or
Yeah, we
cute about
understand.
it, you know?
We understand.
But if
You've
it's help-
articulately expressed your point. I guess we can,
Well, the board's posture
Adjourn
now
this and then-
is we have two routes that we can look at this. We can either side with Tien and respect the building inspector's decision, but as Mr. Bennett pointed out, he's applied in the alternative for a variance, so that if we do lump in the square foot, the gross floor area of this outbuilding accessory structure, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a 340-foot deviation from what would be.
At 370, it's the principal dwelling, the total permitted is, on this site, is 3,930 square feet. If you throw in the pool pavilion, it's 3,898. Throw in the whole thing, and we're saying you only throw in 30 of it, which keeps us just under the GFA, the combined GFA for the accessory structures and the.
So assuming arguendo that we are including the accessory structure
I need
altogether.
371 square feet.
So 371 square feet. So Mr. Bennett has asked for a variance, which the board can let Mr. Bennett speak to the merits of the variance, the 5-part test, and the board can take that under consideration also. So there's two angles at which we can look at this.
So if I may, the proposed pool pavilion, again consisting of only 30 square feet of enclosed powder room with covered porch, has been located on the subject property to comply with all applicable setbacks. It complies with all accessory structure setbacks. Approval has been obtained from the Board of Architectural Review and Historic Preservation to construct the proposed pool pavilion with the powder room. And I would submit that the construction of the pool pavilion will not cause any undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood. We already received ARB approval to construct the pool house as designed. We'd have to go back to the ARB. I don't think, given the minimum size of this and the fact that it complies with all accessory setbacks and all setbacks is warranted. It's a minor request. It gets the benefit is to have this powder room, which is understandable in a small pool house, to be able to use the facility, so to speak, without having to go back into the house. The applicant seeks to have the covered area adjacent to the pool, of course. A pool house has to be within 20 feet of a pool, and we meet that requirement. 371 square feet of gross floor area relief. I wouldn't have the nerve to come and ask this board, and ever since the GFA requirements have been imposed, I've told people that call me and ask for GFA relief from a principal structure. I've told them I don't do that. I don't think that, I don't even know that the board has ever granted a GFA request for the principal structure. So I'm not here asking for that. I understand why those GFA limitations were imposed. Lots and lots of public hearings, lots of, a lot of political capital expended on both sides of that argument. So I'm not asking for any GFA request for relief from the principal structure. I've never asked. Ever since the GFA requirements were imposed, I've never come and asked this board for that. I understand that's a bright line, but this is for 371 square feet of relief for an accessory structure where I think, you're not supposed to blend these things in, but I think the interpretation is on very shaky grounds. So I think that should make it easier, hopefully, to grant the relief. It's a type 2 action, therefore granting the relief will not, as a matter of law, have an undesirable effect on the environment. The applicant submitted architectural plans with the Board of Architectural Review and was approved. After the approval was received from the ARB, the building department advised, again, we submit incorrectly that the open but enclosed portions of the proposed pavilion must be counted towards the GFA. I don't want to belabor it. I have a much longer case and I'll likelihood to present later. I think it speaks for itself. You're either comfortable with the variance application or not. I think it's a very, very minor ask. No impact. I don't know of any adverse I don't know of any adverse letters or comments. You'll open it up to public discussion to see if there are any, but my preference would just be for you to agree with me on the interpretation, which I think I've proven pretty well. That's
Do
all.
the board have any questions?
No,
Are there
I don't
any
think so.
to the
Aye,
public?
aye.
Are there any members of the public who'd like to be heard?
I
Is
have
it
no
the-
hands.
Is it the board's intention that we should close this evening for a decision?
Sounds fine with me, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fine with me.
So for clarity, are we closing it for the board's decision on both prongs on either our agreement with the interpretation and if we disagree with the interpretation, or if we agree with the interpretation for the variance?
Correct.
Correct. Do you need a motion?
Yes,
Yes.
let's do a formal motion and a vote
Okay.
to
I
close the
move-
public hearing and within 62 days,
I move that we
produce
do that.
produce a written decision.
Yes, sir. Second?
Second,
All in favor? Aye.
aye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brennan.
Adam.
I think our colleagues can return.
We have the next one, in the words of Ace Ventura, may I be entitled to a short bathroom break.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a great, we appreciate the visual, we do. Thank you again.
I think it was, I'm not a good enough lawyer. Parcel licenses. But we can,
So Mr. Farron, Mr. Greenwald, did you overhear any of that, or?
Oh, yeah.
So we decided to close it, and then within 62 days, we'll do a decision. I clarified that we'll decide on
Yes.
either prong.
Thanks for walking it.
so we can have a session with Jen.
No, because when I used to be on the
Yeah.
other side of the table, I knew how frustrating it could be. You'd go in.
Can you give us that?
Very interpretation.
Needs to
Wait,
file
are
that.
you closing it for both prongs, for variance?
The calculation I was doing.
So I try to be as
Clear.
Just doing this way. Because half the lots are beaches, they're semi-public, and then the part to the north is the floodplain, that's the water wetland.
So where are 1750 Waterview we're on, right? I'm good. I'm good. It's been an adventure. You got me busy with Hill Street. It's all right. No, I got it. Hey, it's still Catterson. Yeah. But no, it's been good. Rolling.
John, are we ready? I'm ready. Oh, we're definitely ready. I thought you were on recess. Okay.
guys went to college together, so
Oh, that's- Okay. Let's move it along then. Julie, are you ready?
Sorry.
Okay, so we'll move now to case number 3155, 1750 Waterview LLC, 1750 Meadow Lane.
I was just gonna make one quick point.
Yeah, the quick point is in Chick's domain. Go ahead.
Just that, before John starts, I want to indicate that we are withdrawing the seeker classification comment from the memo that was prepared. It was inadvertently included. There is a chapter 54 in the village code, but the DEC supersedes it, and you can't take a type 2 action and make it a type 1 action under village law. So I just want to make it clear that any future memos will omit that.
So just to clarify, it's a type 2.
Type 2 action.
Type 2. Cool.
In all fairness to Chick's staff, it's in the village code.
Right.
It's just that subsequent to the inclusion of wetlands applications in the village code, the DEC redid their seeker regs, which said that if the DEC makes it a type 2 action, in this case the construction of a single-family residence, a municipality can't make it anything other than a type 2 action. So I understand, in fairness, it's still in the code. Yeah, but no, I didn't want to jump up and down too much, because the village code.
So just for the board's edification, type 2 is the least intense secret classification. That means it requires the least level of scrutiny.
Yeah, and a type 2 action are, as a matter of law, deemed not to have a significant environmental effect. That doesn't mean that we don't have to go through your, local wetlands law and zoning law, but it's helpful. So tonight, I'm John Bennett, Bennett and Reed, 212 Windmill Lane, for the applicant, Bailey Larkin, also with the officers with me. Rich Warren, always a pleasure to work with Rich Warren from InterScience Research, and also a great pleasure to have Lee Wisher from Woods Hole Group here. I've worked with Lee on various projects over the last 20 years. A little bit about him, has a Bachelor of Science in Engineering. I'll bring him up to talk later. Masters of Science in Coastal Geology, a PhD in Physical Oceanography, with concentration in waves and current and sediment transport. Worked for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Coastal Engineer Research Center, beach nourishment management and coastal erosion, and presently working in erosion management and wetlands restoration, and he's a professional wetland scientist, so knows what he's talking about, and always a great pleasure to work with Lee from Woods Hole Group. Michael Lamont and Frank Coutard from Stell Lamont Ronnie are here. They're the project architects. And Ian Handback from LaGuardia Landscape Design was hopefully with us via Zoom. Hope so. Anyway, so what I'm going to do, I'm under no illusions that this is going to be a one-night thing. I don't think I've ever had a one-night wetlands session except for increasing a buffer. So what I'll do is I'll try to put it in a good pace, and hopefully educate the board as to what we're trying to do here and why we think it meets the policies of the wetlands law, it creates awful lot of mitigation and is not gonna have anything other than a good environmental effect here. The application was filed in February of 2023 and first scheduled for a public hearing on July 11th. The application was adjourned on the board's own motion to August 8th. And then on August 1st, we received Chick's memo, it was suggested by the council for the board that the application be adjourned so that we would have time to address the Nelson Pope comments. We only received the Nelson Pope memo on August 1st. If we were consistent with the board's policy for getting it to them in time, it would have given us 5 or 6 days. So at the suggestion of board council, we adjourned it to this date. A broad review of the project, the applicant seeks both dimensional relief, the dimensional relief being from the dollar line, and wetland special permit to redevelop the subject property located at 1750 Meadow Lane. So, and also we're asking for relief, which sounds it's not really relief, but we're proposing to increase significantly a previously imposed scenic easement and to significantly revegetate the property. We're asking for a larger house here, so we know we've got to put in as much mitigation as possible. The property is burdened by wetlands on the north west portion of the lot, and Rich will discuss that in a bit. But the wetlands are likely a remnant, lower topographic spot when Meadow Lane was improved. These are not wetlands that are regulated by the DEC, only the village. And we do have, and we'll talk a little bit about the relative value of these wetlands, which are not connected at all. They're not the high quality wetlands that one finds on the north side of Meadow Lane, which is of course Shinnecock Bay, where, again, just a little bit of information. I don't think, other than redevelopment of developed properties, which we'll talk about some of the board's actions on those, but redevelopment of already developed properties, I don't believe there's any new residential construction or construction of any nature on the north side of Meadow Lane because of its sensitive tidal wetlands, connected tidal wetlands, sort of a very sensitive area. I don't think there's been any new development there in 40, 45 years. So, in addition, given its location on Meadow Lane, the dollar over line dune crest setback requirements are applicable. I think we're going to be, we'll talk about not only how we wish this board to act on that dollar over line, but also how the board has did previously. We did receive letters from the owners of the adjacent properties to the east and the west. Both neighbors expressed support. This, of course, goes to the character of the neighborhood as it relates to the zoning, relief from the zoning setback. Here, the zoning setback is the dollar over line. The dollar over line is contained in the zoning code, so it's a request for a zoning line setback. So the next door neighbors' letters are very helpful in terms of that. I think I demonstrated in a prior case that letters of support from the neighbors as it relates to requests for zoning setbacks in the 5-part test are probably the best indication that there's no negative impact on the environment. That's a case, the impact of letters of support, that's a case Coleman versus Corman, which I litigated before the Supreme Court involving this board, Dr. Corman. We had letters of support from the neighbor, and the Supreme Court Suffolk County said that's the best indication of no impact on the neighborhood. And also a case that I litigated in Shelter Island, the Dolphin Lane Associates case, which Judge Whalen agreed with my position that the letters of support are significant evidence of no impact on the neighborhood. And the Shelter Island appealed, and the appellate division agreed with our position. The property is presently improved by an existing residence, tennis court, and swimming pool located on the north side of the existing home. The swimming pool is only about 35 feet from the wetlands. We're going to take that very far away from the wetlands. The proposed wastewater system is 96 feet from the wetlands. We're gonna move that to 190, is 96 feet from the wetlands. We're gonna move that 193 feet from the wetlands. So, and the pool, we're gonna move from the 35 feet to 160, which is a conforming setback. So we've got, you know, probably the biggest, you know, concern about impact on wetlands, the wastewater systems and pools, because what can happen during a flood event, the wastewater system going from 96 feet to 193 feet. That's 7 feet short of the 200-foot setback contained in the Southampton Village Code, which, by the way, is the most extreme setback I'm aware of in any wetlands law. But we're almost meeting it, shifting it quite a bit. And we're gonna, and one of the things we need to get all this stuff out of the way of the wetlands is some help from you on the dollar line, which we're gonna hope you will agree with this, that I'd like to view the dollar line as sort of like a vestigial remnant in the village code, because it's simply, the facts that gave rise to it are simply just not the case anymore. Having to do as much as anything with the extension of the easterly groin on the Shinnecock Inlet. But I don't think it takes anyone having a terribly intense amount of attention to this issue to see that those properties down there to the east of the easterly groin have accreted significantly. So the dollar line is not really something that really should be in play, and I think this board has recognized that in some other applications. Then we're also talking about some significant revegetation to the property. We want to expand the scenic easement by 3,482 square feet. Again, we're offering this as mitigation, but we're also offering to revegetate essentially all areas north of the proposed residence that are not improved by driveway access, stairs, and tennis court with native vegetation. And that'll result in a total of 28,060 square feet of native vegetation, a little bit shy of 3/4 of an acre. So we received a memo from Nelson Pope and Voorhees and submitted a letter in response to that, September 7th. I don't expect everyone to have read this, and I certainly would obviously would expect that we would be putting this over, but let's get the case in. I'm not going to talk about the type 2 action because Chick very graciously stated that we were correct in saying that this is a type 2 action. We submitted with the board numerous prior special permits that were granted. This project is demonstrated through our written submissions and will be further explained this evening, is consistent with the policies and provisions of the wetlands regulations and precedent established by this board. So for example, we're moving a pool 160 feet from this, what we think is a very marginal wetland, when the board in the past, in exchange for doubling the size of the houses on the north side of Meadow Lane, has allowed pools to be less than 50 feet from a much more fragile ecosystem and wetland system. So, you know, I'll just say that having been involved in a lot of these over the last 30 years, that a lot of the relief that was given by the board in a lot of these matters was much more, for lack of better description, much more aggressive than what we're asking for, because the board saw net the environmental situation was going to be improved. All the existing improvements on the subject properties are permitted. The certificate of occupancy was issued. There are no violations or anything on the property. The prior owner was granted approvals by this board to construct additions to the south side of the existing residence, construct a new pool house and terrace on the south side, and to construct a attached garage. That proposal would have left the existing wastewater system, which was approved by this board, 89 feet from the wetlands. Those improvements were not constructed. So what we're offering here, we think, is demonstrably and unequivocally a much better product, as it were. The proposed redevelopment will be greatly more environmentally sensitive than the previously approved plan by significantly increasing the increasing setbacks from the wetlands in the northwest portion of the property. Probably the easiest way to explain this application is to review the plans proposed by InterScience. I'll have Rich is going to talk about that in a little bit. The existing swimming pool and surrounding deck are, again, 30 feet from the wetlands. The closest proposed structure, which are the entry steps to the residence, are proposed to be located 64.4 feet from the wetlands. Thus, all proposed structures would retreat from wetlands by more than 30 feet. And again, those the retreat from the of the septic system and the pool are much greater than 30 feet. So that's shown on the comparative plan, which I'll have Rich talk about in the future, not in the not too much future. Again, we're abandoning the existing wastewater system located only 96 feet from the wetlands and putting it almost 200 feet from the wetlands and putting in a new IA system 193 feet away. And then, as shown on the Squires and Holden plan, which I think is up there, Rich, I know you're going to talk about it a little bit, but and thanks, Rich. We want to amend and increase, obviously, for mitigation, the limits of a scenic easement that was previously imposed by this board prior to a prior ZBA grant. The easement are shown on the Squires and Holden plan. The language of the easement specifically allows for the portion of the driveway that's existing to be maintained and continue to do that, but we want to add to that scenic easement. The area of the existing scenic easement is 11,276 square feet, and we're proposing to add 3482 for a 14,758 square feet increased scenic easement. And again, in addition, revegetate stuff even outside that scenic easement area, we want to create a really extensive and diverse wetlands habitat where presently there are fairly poor quality wetlands. And by the way, I'll talk about one of the decisions where the board realized, I think it was the A.B. Rosen decision, where they talked about granting relief for some stuff very close to wetland because the wetlands were not significant and rather poor in relation to some other wetlands. 116.19.1D, let's talk about the standards that you use. The board shall consider the effect of the proposed activity with respect to flood and storm dangers. This is a FEMA non-conforming house. The new house would be constructed according to all, not only FEMA elevation requirements, but ever-changing and better construction methodology requirements of the Federal Emergency Management Agency regulations, which are, of course, carried out through our own local FEMA code. 116.19.1D also provides the board shall consider the protection or enhancement of the several functions of the wetlands. And it says that when you have tension between a wetland setback and a zoning setback, and here the Dolliver Code, it's the zoning setbacks that are supposed to be relaxed. And we think there's even more reason for that, given the fact that Dolliver line, as I've said, is I think a vestigial element of the village code. We will conform with the coastal erosion hazard area line, but code section 116.19.1E provides that to achieve the maximum feasible setback from wetlands, the zoning board may vary other dimensional regulations. So we took that, we looked at it and said, what's the best thing to vary here without doing any violence to the policies of the code, and that's the Dolliver line. As we've demonstrated in the materials submitted with the board, this portion of Meadow Lane is a wide, stable beach, and the actual crest of dune is located in excess of 320 feet from all of the proposed improvements. That's a lot. It's over 3 times the from the actual crest of the first rank of primary. Interestingly, we included 3 prior decisions of the board. I'll talk about some other decisions later. But one is the application of Amy, Adele, and Van Greenfield, and this board noted All of the applicants' proposed that was a request for relief from the dollar line. All of the applicants' proposed construction will be more than 100 feet from the apparent crest of the dune revealed by current dune topography. In view of the foregoing, we consider the requested dune setback variance to be a technical variance, which is warranted by current dune topography conditions. I mean, ideally, the Board of Trustees would have looked at that section before and realized with the change in the physical and environmental conditions down at that portion of Dune Road, the dollar line was antiquated. In the Greenblatt decision, that was another decision that we handled relating to a property located in 1990 Meadow. The dollar line setbacks were granted. The board noted that all activity was occurring 200 feet from the actual crest of the dune. And then we had an approval at 450 Gin Lane, which allowed for the relaxation of dune crest setbacks for the installation of a wastewater system so that the wetlands setbacks could be maximized. The seaward edge of the proposed pool, which is the seaward most proposed structure, will be no further seaward than any of the improvements on the surrounding properties. We showed that in an aerial, and in keeping with the character of the neighborhood, which is, I think, why the neighbors were happy to provide letters of support. So again, all improvements are located well back from the actual crest of the dune. I'd like to ask Rich Warren to come up and talk about the work that his team have done on mitigation measures and the changes in what's there and what's proposed. And then I'd like Lee Wisher to come up and talk to you about why relaxing the setbacks will not have any negative effect on any sort of dune protective structures.
Good evening, Richard Warren from InterScience Research Associates. I've been familiar with this property. I've been to the property probably a dozen times over the past 2 years. I've had a chance to actually really study the conditions. We were brought onto this team to assist with helping to shape this project to minimize its impact of the dune and the wetlands. Collectively, as the team that was assembled, we encouraged the project to improve the wetland setbacks for the residents, the swimming pool, the septic system, provide a system for positive drainage on this site where there is none at present, and make the residents FEMA compliant, design all structures so they're located landward of the coast erosion hazard line, position the structures in consideration of the neighboring properties, so this way we're not going to be interfering with the enjoyment of the properties of the two neighbors, and undertake a serious native landscape plan for the property. So those were kind of the goals that we set up as a team for this project. We recommended the owner engage Dr. Lee Witcher of the Woods Hole Group, who I've worked with for probably 30 years or so in different projects, to evaluate the construction and its impact on the dune. So he's going to speak later, but I'm really here just to talk about the wetlands. My office prepared a wetlands assessment that was submitted as part of the record. It was prepared by James Walker in my office. In the northwest corner of the property, there's an area of approximately 3,086 square feet of wetlands. I'm just going to show you on the drawings up here. So this first drawing is a triptych that we put together that.
Can you put this on the screen? Do you have it digitized?
I actually did a great and old school. So, can you do it with that?
I can do it and try.
I'm not able,
next time
I'm not in the Zoom.
I apologize.
You wanna let me in? Oh, he's got it, okay.
Sorry.
Somebody knows how to do this stuff, right?
I have a hard enough time remembering things I need to know. Let alone technology.
Okay, there it is.
Right, because of COVID.
Okay, so this is the second drawing, but this is fine, I can use this one. You can see the area. This area up here is the wetlands on the property. In my opinion, and those of in my office, it's an area that is really kind of poor quality wetlands. It's isolated, it straddles the western property line with the neighboring site. It consists primarily of common reed, Phragmites australis, groundsel bush, which is scattered throughout there. Myla minute weed is also found within there. It's got non-native ornamental grasses found along the eastern edge of this little wetland area. There's autumn olive on the western property line on the western side of this little wetland area, which is on the adjacent property. Notably, the common reed, mile-a-minute weed, and the autumn olive are all listed on New York State DEC's invasive species plant list. Our plan is to actually remove the Phragmites that are here, remove the mile-a-minute weed, and restore this area with plants, and that's been designed by LaGuardia Associates. It's really not a robust wetlands pocket. It really has limited value in terms of habitat. The common reed's facultative wetland. I've seen common reed. If you go up to the Southampton landfill, you can find common reed growing up there. I've seen groundsel bush growing up in the moraine, up at elevation 200. I'm in Bridgehampton. That's also a facultative wetlands plant, but it also grows in wetlands as well. It's low-lying, as mentioned by John Bennett. It's probably a remnant of the wetlands before the roadway was improved in this area back in the late 70s. So some years ago, the original topography in this wetland area seems to have been revised on the western side, on the property next door, because you'll see that on the western property, there's a driveway that comes up. We have an aerial photograph of that. There's a driveway that comes up that has been filled. So it's really a small little isolated pocket. In July of 2022, the wetlands line was flagged, and it was confirmed by Nelson Pope and Voorhees, the village's environmental consultant. During the dozen or so times I've been to the property, I've never seen an expression of standing water in this area. So there's a scenic easement that covers the area. Can you, who's? Frank, yeah. This LaGuardia's landscape plan, probably the best one. There's a scenic easement that covers this area that was part of a 2006 zoning board of appeals decision, and it actually crosses over into the driveway. So this is the scenic easement line right here. This was the existing swimming pool. There was an approval that this would come out and a garage would go in this area. And as part of that, a scenic easement was established around the wetland pocket, allowing the driveway to travel through that. Can you bring up ours now, the current proposed landscape plan? No, landscape plan by LaGuardia. There.
L5.1.
Yep, got it. So you can see here the existing scenic easement. Our proposed scenic easement is now to come just behind the existing wall that's here. The driveway that's here is being shifted over a little bit further away from the wetlands in order to try to improve some of the habitat. And now this easement will run parallel to the driveway, not include the driveway, because why would you have a driveway in a scenic easement? And then come down here and extend over to this area. So we have a larger easement area that is proposed with this plan.
If I could just, one of the things that's so dramatic is where the location of the pool is, in contrast to the prior location, which was literally sitting right on top of the scenic easement area, and then also the wastewater system moving 100 feet. But I think that's so dramatic. That's a permitted pool. That was permitted, and it's right on top of the scenic easement area. It's going to migrate all the way over up to the coastal erosion hazard area. If you're kind enough to help us out.
Right. So the pool, you can see the dotted outline right here. So the pool is now moving back over to this side of the home, and then the house and a small walkway that goes around the house is right there. So in consideration of existing conditions, the boundary of the easement's been modified to go around the driveway. The easement will increase in size from 11,276 square feet to 14,758 square feet. It's a 30% increase in the size over the existing easement. We'll be removing the common reed. That's something that's fairly routine on the east end. People have common reed, that people are removing that and restoring it with native plants. This will be a coastal wetland native habitat. The plan was asked for to have more details relative to the removal of the Phragmites, and LaGuardia's plan has provided more details. There's 36 inches of excavation of soil underneath that area in order to get the rhizomes out, and that'll be replaced with a soil sand mix to allow a good medium for the native revegetation. The revegetation in the area that is proposed on the LaGuardia plan includes American holly, black cherry, winterberry, groundsel bush, Joe Pye weed, little blue stem grass, tupelo, red cedar, bayberry, American beachgrass, seaside goldenrod, and switchgrass, all native plants. There will be no formal landscape or lawn on this property when it's done, anywhere on the site. So that this site will all be native landscaping, and that's all is illustrated on the plans by LaGuardia. So overall on the site, there's gonna be 28,060 square feet of restored native plantings for this property. The LaGuardia plans were modified to reflect comments received by Nelson Pope and Voorhees. Test hole data was added, the wetlands line was added, depth of soil removal was added to 36 inches. The fill volumes were provided in terms of bringing that area back to grade, which is 340 cubic yards of clean sand and loam. We've added a Phragmites root barrier since we can't go onto the neighboring property, and they've modified the plant materials and the spacing. So in my opinion, the transformation of the landscape will improve the diversity of the vegetation by replacing invasive plants with native plants. So it'll improve the habitat value on this residential site where right now the Phragmites really don't have a high value in terms of habitat. It's going to eliminate a potential source for use of lawn and landscape and care products that have potential for surface and groundwater impacts, as much as the entire site will utilize native plantings. So I believe that the mitigation being offered by this project is beneficial. We've got an improvement in the septic system design and the septic system location. Back to the triptych. The existing sanitary system is located here, just to the west of the home. It's about 90 feet, a little over 90 feet from the wetlands line. When the plan was approved for the addition to the house, this is a plan that was approved in 2005. It moved the swimming pool from here to here, an extension of a garage through here. They left the septic system in this location, and they put a second sanitary system over in this location. So there was an addition on the back of the house, and then a pool house behind the home. And then what we're proposing is to move the sanitary system, remove this one completely, and put the new sanitary system to the southeast of the home. And again, we're putting the swimming pool in this area. In order to deal with some of the tensions between wetlands and the dune crest, this has been removed and shortened, so this way you can see there's a greater setback from wetlands to structure here. It's going from about 30 feet to some 64 feet in this corner to the corner of this walkway. It's about 70 feet to the corner of the house. So from a setback point of view, we're actually improving those setbacks. The sanitary is moving from 96 feet to 193 feet. There's a plan in the package prepared by LaGuardia that provides stormwater runoff control throughout the site. It's extensive, that'll control runoff for 2 inches of stormwater on the site, where at the present time there is no stormwater control. The driveway entrance has been shifted, so it's been slid to the east about 20 feet in order to increase the buffer. And again, we've increased the size of the easement from 11,276 square feet to 14,000 square feet. This is a significant native revegetation plan. I believe that from a wetlands perspective, this project provides positive benefits over what exists and even over what had been approved previously by this board. So I'll turn the presentation over to Lee Wisher to talk about the dune conditions behind the house, but I think from a wetlands perspective, if you take into condition the character of the wetlands that are here, which are really, it's not a robust wetland system, and it has plants that are simply on the New York State invasive species list that we're going to remove, we think that this will be beneficial. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mitch. Again, Lee was gonna come up, most of that'll be related to the request for the relief from the dollar line, not exclusively, but relief from the dollar line. We think that line should give, so we can greatly increase wetland setbacks and provide more mitigation.
John, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
If we go back to the next page of InterScience's triptych,
Right.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Am I interpreting correctly, right? So we've got our blue setback line coming south off of the wetlands, and we've got our black Dolliver line coming north. And then we also have to imagine our side yard setback on the east side of the property. So am I interpreting this correctly to say there's essentially no or very limited buildable envelope on the property?
That's correct.
Only a couple
This-
hundred square feet,
this-
probably?
That's the 150-foot structural setback right through there. We didn't even put it from the wetlands over here because it doesn't make any difference.
Mm-hmm.
150 there, there's a Dolliver line, this is the 100-foot setback from the Dolliver line. So you really have this spot like right in here. That's
Okay, yeah, I think it's important to note that you have a lot that is essentially unbuildable
Constricted.
per code.
It just,
Well, the envelope is,
yeah, no. It
Very,
creates,
very
in
tiny.
the old days, we would call that a textbook practical difficulty.
okay.
But just to follow up on your point, although you don't have a building envelope as of right, you're still asking for 16,824 feet of lot coverage?
There's an increase in lot coverage from 11,000 to 16,000.
I'm following up on Luke's point is, you don't have a building envelope, it's a constricted, constrained lot. But you're proposing that although you don't have a building envelope as of right, you still are asking for 16,000 square feet of lot coverage.
Yes.
Okay. Just setting it down.
Excuse me?
No, I just want to get our
Yeah,
facts.
no, and I'm gonna let you decide whether you want me to go through the precedent that the board has created in many cases where there's zero wetlands and zoning setback on a property. I can either hold off to the next meeting or do it this evening, but given the board's manner of dealing with these cases, we don't think that's an unreasonable ask at all. But let me ask Lee to come up.
I was all set for you to keep going, John.
It was unfair, Lee. They introduced you and then they didn't let you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, for the record, my name is Lee Wisher. I'm a senior scientist at the Woods Hole Group based in Falmouth, Massachusetts. Excuse me.
Bless you.
I submitted a report that is in the filing packet with more details in which detailed my findings. However, I'd like to provide a brief summary for the board here, so to bring it back to the forefront, a summary of my findings and conclusions. I've had the chance to visit the site on multiple occasions and was able to assess the site conditions. And specifically, I was asked to evaluate the Dolliver line and the potential impact of the proposed project on the dune system and whether it would have a negative impact on the natural protective feature. I think we've had reference to the Dolliver line multiple times this evening. It was established in 1981. The intent was to protect future houses from storm damage. And I think Alex pointed out that when it was established, there was no development along this section of beach. The beach was low-lying. There was not a continuous dune formation. When the Shinnecock Inlet jetties were constructed between 1947 and 1954, this dramatically changed the character of the beach and the littoral system or the accretional patterns that occur along this section of beach. So as a result of the jetty construction, the dunes have been building seaward along the shoreline located to the east of the jetties. In the period between 1994 and 2023, the dunes have procreated seaward approximately 164 feet. Now that's just the dunes and not the beach. The beach has procreated even further. And so if we break that down, that is, the dunes have been, just the dunes, not the beach, have been accreting about 6 feet per year for the last 29 years, and that's still continuing today. When the Dolliver line was initially established, I don't think there was any contemplation that rapid accretion along this section of beach was going to occur, nor the rapid dune building that has occurred in the ensuing years. Now, the natural protective feature, or the primary dune, is now located approximately over 300 feet from the proposed project. Additionally, there's a secondary dune in front of the primary dune, which is growing rapidly and is well developed, and probably in the next 5 or 6 years that may be be classified as a primary dune because of the fact it's growing in both in height and width. So it's my conclusion that the proposed project will have no impact on the primary or the secondary dune, and thus will not impact the natural protective features' ability to provide storm damage prevention to this property. Now, there has been a question raised, and I think it was raised by Chick, concerning the landform immediately seaward of the proposed project. I went and looked at that quite extensively, and this landform is irregular, and an irregular feature that is discontinuous, and it's characterized by discontinuous hummocks and swales, and the hummocks are intermittently vegetated with scrub dune vegetation and low-lying pine trees and other vegetation. Now, a closer examination of these hummocks show that they most likely were deposited there either through excavation or materials that were deposited there because of the fact that they're composed of sand, shells, and gravel. So these are not sediments that are naturally deposited through aeolian processes or wind-blown processes that are characterized of dune building out on the beachfront. So additionally, these irregular features do not provide flood protection because they provide multiple flooding pathways through these features to the house. So they don't function as a natural protective feature. They, as I said, are discontinuous, and so they have limited value for providing storm damage protection to the property. I think that, so that kind of wraps up. I think in conclusion, the dunes on this property have been growing very rapidly. They've been growing in elevation and width since the Dolliver setback line was established. And the primary dune is located approximately 300 feet seaward of our proposed project. Additionally, there's a secondary dune that's formed in front of the primary dune, and it's growing rapidly also. The proposed project is landward of the CHA line. The proposed project is in line with the adjacent houses, and so will maintain the characteristic of the neighborhood. And the landform seaward of the proposed project is not a natural dune. It's been artificially placed there. And this landform, as I said, is composed of shells, shell hash, and gravel, and is discontinuous in nature due to the hummocks and swales. So there is no continuous elevation of this landform, which would provide storm damage protection to the house or the adjacent properties. So it's my conclusion, based on my investigation, that the proposed project will not impact the primary dune, nor will it interfere with the primary dune's ability to provide storm damage protection to this property or any of the adjacent properties. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have concerning the primary or secondary dune or the hummocks or swales that are landward of the proposed project. Does anybody have any questions?
I have questions.
Sure.
I appreciate the letter. It was very clear and easy to read and helpful to me,
Well,
for
thank
sure. A hummocks is those little lumps
Yes,
that you see
absolutely.
in the dune. Okay.
Yeah.
When you refer to a distance to the dune, are you referring to the dune crest
Yes,
or
the
just
dune
the start
crest.
of the vegetation?
Yes, the primary dune crest.
When do you think the secondary dune will become the primary dune?
I think that's probably within 5 years or thereabouts. I mean, it's been growing rapidly, but it's you know, you gotta rub the crystal ball and say,
Sure.
well, what do you think?
I'm
So-
just curious.
Oh, yeah.
But let me interject on that, because
sure.
the code is very specific. It's the crest of what is it, what's the technical language? It's the southerly facing, right, the dune crest you take from
The southerly rank
the
of,
southerly rank of the dunes.
which was
So-
flagged,
so-
yeah.
What's it called?
Most seaward rank of Ocean Beach dunes.
Most seaward rank of the ocean beach dunes. So while that's maybe of an interesting topographic or natural features, from a comment from a regulatory view, it doesn't seem like that the dune crest, where the dune crest setback is taken, is migrating at all. I just wanted to make that point clear.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not disputing your.
I'm just really asking out of curiosity. You may want to read in, just to the record, is your final paragraph of page 6, which describes the actual code language about the Dolliver Dune.
Do you have it right there? I don't have.
I can.
You wanna read it?
Yeah, it says, when the Dolliver line, as Alex said in the prior application, when the Dolliver line was created.
You said it, Mike.
When the Dolliver
Well,
line,
sorry,
because
did-
it says because the crest of the first rank of Ocean Beach dunes is indefinite and difficult, if not impossible, to ascertain. And that's clearly a situation that is not the case anymore, as this board has recognized in at least 3 decisions. And again, I think it's just a sort of a vestigial organ in the code. You know, like, I mean, if that was the language.
I don't
we're
disagree
talking
with
about.
that.
You don't disagree.
I don't disagree with what you're saying.
So look at that. Let me clarify something from what Attorney Bennett said and your question. So the the southerly rank of dunes is still growing. It's not migrating, but it's still accreting sand. Both of these dunes are well vegetated, and due to the wind-blown sand, they're capturing sand and they're growing. So the natural protective feature, or the primary dune, which is landward of this secondary dune, is growing at a slower rate than the dune that's on the seaward side,
It's not
because
being fed as much.
it can capture more sand
Right.
because of the vegetation.
Could both dunes be gone next week?
Well, anything's possible, but my namesake is coming up the shoreline, right?
That's right.
But you're going to be spared that. However, Boston, I think, is also. But if we look at the history since the jetties were formed, those dunes have never been knocked down.
Right.
So, you're again. As a scientist, I would say nothing's out of the realm of possibility, but I would say it's extremely unlikely.
They were knocked down in 1938, I believe.
But
Go way
the
back.
jetties weren't there then.
Fair enough.
Okay, I caveated myself.
Oh, okay.
So,
Good catch.
But just out of curiosity, what would happen if there was a 1938 storm?
I would have to go back and look at the storm surges and, geez, I
Big
would like to
question.
model that, because we could do that, but that's not something we did, so.
No, I mean, it'd just be nice to know we're kind of preparing for worst-case scenarios.
Yeah.
That's why we have these laws.
Yeah.
Okay, they're not.
I don't know.
Not
what-
every
I
year
don't,
we're
in
going
this
to have them,
particular
but
area, I don't know what the storm surge was and what the duration was. I understand, yours and the board's curiosity on that. I think it might be out of the realm of feasibility for the homeowner to investigate that. I personally would love to do that, but I'm not sure I could get them to pay me to do that. So, I'm sorry, I can't answer your question specifically.
okay, no, it's expressing our concern
Sure.
that these dunes are protective of the entire street, all of the houses, the entire neighborhood.
Yep.
So, the idea of doing anything that might be counter to more and more protection just is something we need to consider.
Right,
Because
but-
yes, you're right, we're talking about events that happen rarely, but when they do happen, they're devastating.
But I would counter with, our proposed project is not going to interfere with those, the primary protective feature, nor the secondary dune that's growing in front. So, if we were looking for relief or to go into that feature, that would be a completely different story, but we're not proposing to do that.
The house is proposed as FEMA compliant.
Thanks,
Yeah.
that's very helpful.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
thank you so much.
Just for a little bit on that, I think it bears, because Nelson Pope said there was, some of the activity was happening in the dune, and I just don't, and it's with a little bit more investigation, you'll see at Dr. Busher's letter, the proposed project will be relocated with a discontinuous topographic feature composed of sand, shells, small stones, and other debris. This is dredge spoil. When I was a kid, I would drive down Meadow Lane. Well, the parts that weren't didn't have a blacktop on them, and there was almost a constant pneumatic dredging going on. There was much more maintenance dredging on the channels on the north side of Shinnecock in those days, and they would put this dredge spoil, people would just let them put the dredge spoils on these vacant parcels, and so that's what it is. But as Dr. Busher finds, that area, which was the concern of Nelson Pope, this is not a natural protective feature and does not provide any storm or surge protection to the property. So as he said, if we were asking to go into a dune, that would be something else. We're nowhere near that. And again, we're not asking for something that this board hasn't recognized and granted in the past, down in that area specifically because of the enormous amount of accretion.
Do we have just an overlay of what you have now and what the project looks like, just a before and after?
I think LaGuardia has that in there.
Oh, and before we get to that, I just wanted to add some of the increase in, and we'll give you a better breakdown on this because you're entitled to it. But some of the increase in coverage was already approved in that prior
2006.
to 2006. So it's not as much of an ask as it seems like. So, but we'll give you the numbers on that.
And how
Think,
many square feet is this house?
9,000,
700, something like that.
I'm sorry. The proposed is 9,746. The existing is just shy of 7.
What's
The
just
existing is just shy of 7,000.
I have a question for you,
It's
John.
in the
So
high sixes.
they received a bunch of approvals and variances, and then they didn't build the work. What does that mean for the approvals?
So those variances are still valid, but our new variance would supersede that.
Right.
Gonna run with the land.
The language of that.
I mean, they could build that.
As Mr. Bennett pointed out, they
Yeah.
run with the land, the variances, they don't extinguish upon transfer of ownership, for
Sure.
example. So those variances are still well and good, but we are just bringing in new variances to supersede them and to reconfigure the property.
Can you talk a little bit about the thinking on the driveway and the second curb cut?
We're moving, I think there's only one curve cut, right?
There's two.
Oh, there are two? Oh, my apologies. I'm sorry.
There's a single curb cut at the present time located here with a driveway that loops around. So the entrance to the house is here. At the present time, the entrance to the house will remain in that same location. And then this driveway loops around. The idea is swing this over. You can see the driveway to the entrance is flipped over a little bit. And just bring this up straight in, so this way they have a driveway straight to the garage that goes underneath the home in this area. So the garage is here. Be able to get down, and this way they'd still have some area to be able to get to the front door of the house instead of having to enter the house through the garage.
But it also moves it further away,
But-
moves the hardened area further away from the wetland.
Yeah, so we moved it over, and we've pulled this back a little bit, but still reserved a little spot up through here where we would be able to have some.
So they're not two driveways, that curvy one and the one right on the lot line?
This is existing right now.
Yep,
This is what was approved the second time,
yep.
and what we're looking to do is to maintain this one and just bring it straight up with the curb cut, second axis out, which we're allowed to have.
So it doesn't change the functionality of driving to the front door or driving to the garage. It really just is a more direct exit.
Yes, yeah, but it also takes away, that was a garage over there, so it's really pushed really hard to get the client over there, take as much underneath the house.
What is the parking court proposed to be, material-wise?
Pervious surface, correct.
Like the little blocks?
Correct. I think it's gravel, I think it's a pervious gravel, but no blacktop.
No
Right,
asphalt,
right, right.
no concrete.
John, what's the difference, just language-wise, between scenic easement and wetlands buffer in this
John.
instance? This John.
Effectively, nothing. I mean, it's whatever you put in the document.
Okay.
I mean, I've always, I guess when I was the town lawyer many years ago, the planners would insist that a scenic easement said you could do nothing. But a buffer usually allows for a wetlands management plan, and you come back and showing the village that you want to do additional wetlands restoration. Has a little bit more flexibility, but then only with the imprimatur and approval of the board. So it really depends. You can call it a scenic easement, you call it a wetlands buffer. It depends what the language is, that's all.
Chick, would one be more appropriate than another in this instance?
Well, I don't really understand the purpose of the original scenic easement because the driveway goes through it. It appears to create somewhat of an additional buffer from the wetlands, and I think that's the intent of our code now, is to retain as much as possible within 125 feet. I think that the trade-off of the modification of the easement seems to make sense to me.
Agreed.
It gets the driveway out of it. It seems to increase the size a little bit. And it, sorry, thank you. And it fully protects the wetlands in areas west of the driveway. So we don't do that on every property because I think we're doing it here because there's one that existed
Right.
that was created many years ago that, you know, we don't deal with this all the time.
Mr. Bennett, do you have proposed language? Have you submitted, or?
No, we can submit it, but again, I'm not playing a word swap game. We'll put in that document, call it a buffer, an easement, whatever Chick wants us to put in there.
I'm just asking
Yeah.
what the difference is
Well, just
from your
for the board's
perspectives.
edification, I've seen them mostly on in the unincorporated town world, but I've seen non-fertilization buffer being a phrase used. I've seen scenic easement. I've seen conservation easement. The nomenclature and even the text of the document varies wildly.
The language
but-
usually describes its intent and purpose.
Yes.
For example, you might see a scenic easement where, on the sides of the road for visual separation
Right,
purposes,
right.
but aren't necessarily related to a wetlands. Other municipalities have that, to protect view sheds, for example.
Do you have a-
Conservation easement, I've seen conservation easements used as a tax tool for charitable deduction, and what that really does is somebody, instead of giving the fee of the property, they'll put a conservation easement on it, which will strip it of any residential development rights. That's usually where I see that phrase.
Do you have a preference, Alex, as the planner, on what sort of language they use to describe this area?
Not necessarily, as my suggestion would just be that it be descriptive towards the board's intent.
Okay.
That if it's
Yeah,
for
I
the
agree.
purposes of wetlands, it should say so.
I agree.
While we have everybody here, and for my own education, I feel as though we've spent quite a bit of time talking about the Dolliver line tonight. And if I've missed this, forgive me, but I don't think there's been enough time spent on the coastal erosion hazard line and in the proposed conditions.
Well, we're conforming with we're behind it. Completely
It is.
behind the coastal erosion hazard line.
Pool looks like it's sitting right on it, John.
Yeah, but that's like, it complies.
Can
Can I ask this, do you have a measurement from the road to the coastal erosion hazard line?
Yeah, I've never been asked that question. What's the purpose of it, if I may?
Just trying to figure out
I
how
mean,
much
we can scale it, or.
we're putting in there. You can
Well, let's-
ballpark it, what do we think it's?
Well, Rich has a survey and a engineer's scale, so we'll give you the answer. I was just curious, the reason I said I've never been asked that question before, I was just wondering what the
Just
thought
looks-
was
looks
with
like
it,
a
Mark.
pretty dense development where the building is going on. Large house, tennis court, pool, all kind of very compacted. That's what it looks like, so
Well,
that's why I
yeah,
was asking.
we're compacting it because of the limitations on the property, but net, we've got a much better environmental thing going here. I mean, remember, moving that septic system to an almost conforming location from 93 to almost 200 feet and getting that pool out of where it is now.
About 290 feet.
So the coastal erosion hazard area is 290 feet from the,
From the
from
road?
the right-of-way?
From the northern property line.
The road right-of-way, the right-of-way. 290 feet.
John, what are the chances of abandoning the tennis court?
Not gonna happen. John Corey's, application, what was that, 930? 950? Board has never asked for that before, and that's an existing permitted, use. It obviously, adds a significant amount to the value of the property, and also is an amenity which pre-exists any of these regulations. It must have, my guess is it has a front yard variance. I'll look
I
at
haven't
it.
seen that, our application asks for all prior variances, so how was this tennis court installed?
It was a variance. It must have been a variance, more, yeah.
Okay, just, could you provide
Yeah,
that?
it has a CO. We'll-
It's
Is
in
it in
there.
the package,
we'll
the
get it
front
for you.
yard
It's in the
variance
pa-
for the tennis court?
It's in the packet, yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
I mean, the board has never, has granted, this board has granted historically many wetlands applications and allowed existing structures to remain. Again, the Corey application, was that 930? 950, there's a tennis court that's essentially wrapped by wetlands.
I guess it goes to Mark's point of his feeling that the development within the allowable confines is dense. Site constraints dictate that, but if I were the homeowner and it were a matter of having my tennis court or getting this house, I'd get rid of the tennis court.
Well, it's not something that we're interested in
That's fine.
entertaining.
So-
We don't think that would be an appropriate condition.
So I think that the reason why I asked the question was, when I measured where you're putting this 10,000 square foot house, pool, tennis court, you're essentially putting it on a 58,000 square foot area.
Yeah, but you're viewing it in a vacuum.
I'm viewing it in a subcontext, which is, that's where all of these building structures are located, within 58,000 square feet. So when Luke is asking for the removal of a tennis court, I think viscerally it might be that, hey, this just seems like a big ask to put all of this lot coverage, 16,000 feet of lot coverage in 58,000 square feet of building. It's just, I'm just putting it on the record, it's something that the
Yeah.
board will consider.
I understand, it's not a big ask when it's compared to the significant migration of, just amongst other things, the two most, problematic structures in relation to wetlands, which are the septic systems and the pool. And so,
Well, I'm not that bothered by where the pool is. I might put a buffer in there to protect it, but on one hand, we're putting on the record that those wetlands are not high-quality wetlands, et cetera, so I'm not that bothered by those wetlands. I would just, put a buffer between the wetlands and the pool. So I'm not
Okay, well,
seeing that,
we're
I'm not
doing that.
personally seeing that initially as a major environmental
okay,
benefit.
well, we would agree then.
I think I would offer relative to that point, Ralph, I guess.
Okay, yeah.
So when you look at the character of neighbors, they're really no different than the character of the neighbors. So this part of the analysis that we did was we drew these two red lines here. This is the seaward edge of the homes.
Could you get up to the mic?
Sorry.
I'll put it over.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
If you lay that flat, they can capture it on the camera.
So this is the seaward edge of the homes here, and the seaward edge of the pools here, and we're behind both of those. But you see that the development that's on both these properties, driveways, tennis courts, swimming pools, homes, we're essentially consistent with the character of what's going on in this area. So, and to now come in and say you have to remove this, it seems somewhat
Punitive.
unfair.
Well, no one is saying that you have to remove it,
No.
right?
How big
No,
are
you're
those
saying,
houses?
you're suggesting that it be a condition of the approval, and I'm
I-
suggesting it's an inappropriate condition,
I
that's all.
asked if they would be open to removing it.
No,
How large are the houses on each side?
I don't have the answer.
we'll
to
get
that.
the
We
square
will-
footage for you.
Okay.
We'll
I
get
would
it
like
to the
see
extent that
just
we
for
can.
comparison,
Yep.
what's the lot coverage and what are the
We'll get
square
that.
footage of the houses
We'll get that.
in the neighborhood?
But I found it interesting that you didn't think that a pool, moving a pool out of proximity to a wetland.
No, I didn't say, I said there's another answer to that, which is just putting in a wetlands buffer. And on one hand, I'm listening to Rich talk about how these aren't particularly important wetlands.
Mhm.
And on the other hand, it's very, very important to move the pool away from the wetlands. So I was a little bit confused.
No, I'm trying to meet the setbacks as much as I can. That's all, regardless of that, and just to pay some homage to the setbacks required in the code.
But if I said that these wetlands were important, you would say impose a 125-foot setback or 150-foot setback. And I think that one of the things is, I think in evaluating the proposal that you have here, you should take into consideration the condition of the wetlands that are here. And this is, in my opinion, probably a remnant of topography prior to this. You've got a paved road running down through here that is village-owned, that's providing drainage and doing all the things that it's doing into the wetlands on the north side. So we think from the character of the wetlands, this is really not a robust wetlands. It's poor quality vegetation. We're trying to do as best we can to make it better for you. That's why we've improved the buffer. We've moved the structure back as far as we can, but we know we've got constraints on this side too. So I don't think.
I'm following up on Luke's point, which is, you're talking about environmental benefits.
Yep.
And Luke asked for a major environmental benefit on behalf of the village, which is remove the tennis court because it's.
Why
so
is that
close
a
to
major
wetlands.
environmental benefit? It's a
For the same
benign
reason
use.
moving the pool would be.
No, pools, a pool is much more, during a flood event, you've got treated
fair.
water going into a wetland, that's literally apples and oranges, that makes no sense at all.
Do you think so, Chick?
And just for the board's edification, very long story short, there's a long line of case law which curtails to what extent this ZBA or any planning board can demand or condition, demand of an applicant or condition an approval on.
Nobody did that.
So,
Well, let him
no, I
finish.
understand, but that's.
It was a simple
It's just-
question.
No,
I'd
that's-
like council to be able to finish, because it was in response to a question.
I'm just putting that out there for the edification of the board, in regard to, things like, floating ideas of removal of things which are already as of right or already benefit from
Well,
variances.
the pool is as of right too, and they're offering to remove it. Okay,
Understood.
they're offering environmental benefits and offering to remove something that's as of right. Luke's question is perfectly consistent with that line of thinking.
No, but you're
To me.
ignoring your own council's advice, which says you can't condition a grant on removing an already existing improvement.
And no one has floated conditions. I don't want to put any words in anyone's mouth, but I'm just putting it out there as a matter of caution.
Let's just clarify that the question was, would your client
understand the
consider
question.
it?
I understand
Which
the
you said
question.
no, they won't.
Yep.
So,
I'd like to recommend that we close this hearing.
Yeah, why don't, okay, do we have enough, by the way, we have square footage, we have lot coverage. Do you have any other questions?
No, not right now.
Just some questions? Does anybody from the public wish to be heard on this? Do you want to speak in any way about this at this point?
Only that, I really appreciate the response to the August 1st NPV memo that kind of got us to this hearing with this amount of information. I would like the opportunity to review the submission because it just came in Friday. Compare it to that memo, see if there are any other items that I think would be beneficial to the application and to the board's consideration. So if we could have that opportunity to review it and respond back to the board based on that submission from Friday, I would appreciate that.
Perfect. Are you amenable to just adjourning for all purposes at this stage?
When Chick asks that question, I always say yes. Only fair.
Okay, so I'll motion in case number 3155, 1750 Waterview LLC, 1750 Meadow Lane, to adjourn for all purposes. Can I have a second?
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
And then we can motion to close the public hearing of the Zoning Board of Appeals
Hey,
dated.
we had one more item, didn't we?
Did we miss something?
Well, we were supposed to talk about our work sessions.
Oh, just a save the date in case anyone forgot. There's about Escova Municipal
housekeeping.
Training.
we are done.
Lou, could you?
That was to save the date for the ethics.
No,
Oh, the
well,
work
it's for
session, yeah.
board training. So if anybody would like to go to, please let Tajay in our office
Oh,
know
the
who's going to do the
What date
registration.
is that?
No, I signed
It's
this.
on
I gave
October
that to you.
10th. At
October what?
October 10th at 5:30.
What was the adjourn date for, are we on October 26th also?
26th.
October
I gave
26th.
this to Alex.
We gave it to Alex. John. Alex has a
Oh, there's a copy over there?
Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine, it's fine.
Of what?
Okay.
I have the folder over here.
So,
I need the folder.
housekeeping items, our next meeting is October 26th. After that, November 14th and December 12th. Did you want to talk about that, Julia?
Well, I think that sometimes it may not be appropriate for us to be waiting a full month for some of these applications, particularly if, because of our needs, we're holding them over. I think specifically of the one at 2020, asking them to wait a full month before, when we've asked to see talk to the building inspector, doesn't seem like it may not be fair to the applicants.
I thought we postponed to the 26th because we all have a required seminar to attend at the beginning of October.
That was the reason why that date was chosen, because 10/10 was the training date, would have been in the board's second Tuesday meeting.
Right. We have required training on October 10th.
Okay.
Okay, so let me
Just wanted to
motion.
be sure that we were making space available for the public.
I'm not trying to intrude. Are you talking about the possibility of a meeting before the 26th? Is that,
Yes, but we can't. We can't.
have
We
ethics
tried, but
training.
we have a required training that we need to go to.
Also, I think all applications have already been adjourned past that date, and I don't know if we could notice
Yeah, we
a
could.
meeting in between.
We
Yeah.
can talk about it, Julia, some more, but for right now, let's motion to close the public hearing dated September 12th, 2023. Can I have a second?
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.